After my lengthy conversation with Magnus, I began implementing the first step of my plan. Magnus was right. I couldn't tackle everyone at once. I needed to approach them one by one. The night offered little rest. My mind was occupied with plans for each potential threat in my life. Dylan was my immediate concern. The way Lily spoke about her son left me with a nauseating feeling. Although gut instincts weren't something I usually relied on, something deep inside me was insisting that I needed to protect Dylan at all costs. When I wasn't preoccupied with strategies or Dylan's safety, my thoughts drifted back to the Beaumont family. Their two sons, with their remarkable beauty, seemed to relish the game of manipulation and the potential pain they could inflict on others. Mason Beaumont, the eldest, possessed an almost unsettling beauty. The false emotions he wore were meticulously crafted. From our brief encounter, I learned not to trust his outward persona, yet I couldn't shake the odd connection I felt with him. Different from how I felt about Magnus, but still present. Morning arrived all too quickly, and I groaned as sunlight streamed through my curtains. Part of me wanted to stay hidden in my room, dreading the possibility of encountering Lily or Daisy. The thought of enduring another layered conversation with them was overwhelming. Despite my attempts to analyze our brief interactions, I remained uncertain. Even without concrete evidence, I felt Dylan was in danger, and from his reaction, it seemed he shared my concern. The urgency of what he was trying to convey replayed in my mind, but I knew I wouldn't have another chance for a private conversation with him. Lily was too astute to let that happen. I dragged myself out of bed, feeling overwhelmed by the monotony. "I know you'd rather avoid them, but they might let something slip," Kira said with a shrug, sharing my distaste for Daisy and Lily. "I doubt it," I frowned. "They don't trust me, and I'm not inclined to prove myself to them." Another plan was taking shape in my mind. Nothing extraordinary, but it might offer some form of protection for Dylan. Magnus followed me into the hall, not mentioning our secret conversation from the previous night. I had placed a lot of trust in him, but I knew he was capable. His easy agreement to my request made me wonder about his past. He was well-connected, well-trained, and well-spoken. 3 o'clock, Magnus murmured, his breath warm and minty against my ear. I didn't need to speak. I understood his reference. I nodded, a subtle gesture that required little effort. As I walked down the hall, Ember occupied my thoughts. Ember was crucial to my plan involving Dylan. If I could, I'd ask Magnus to keep an eye on the Lancaster heir, but I knew he'd never agree. For reasons unknown, Magnus took his role as my bodyguard very seriously and wouldn't leave my side to protect someone else. When I couldn't locate Ember, I hurried to the kitchens. Amara, as usual, avoided meeting my gaze as she claimed Ember had taken another shift at the cafe. "Amara, I know you're hiding something," I said, frowning. "You've never been a good liar." "Be quiet," Amara scolded, turning her back to continue cleaning. "Please," I sighed. "This is important." "I told you not to involve Ember in this mess," Amara said with a grimace, "and now she's right in the middle of it." "Anything Ember did, she did because she chose to," I countered. "You and Ember know things for a reason. Maybe you're meant to be part of it." Amara paused, turning to face me. Her guarded expression was painful to see, but I understood. I hadn't asked Ember to do more than observe the guests at my gala. "Your mother told me the same thing 10 years ago," Amara said, her frown deepening. "I'm sure she had her reasons," I replied firmly. Amara's eyes softened slightly, and she gave me a weary look. "I hear Ember's your assistant now." "Ember is much more than just an assistant," I said, smiling softly. "Damn right," Amara huffed. I saw her resolve breaking down. She was close to giving me the information I needed. I'd never force her to do anything, I promised. But I need her. She's vital to all of this. Amara seemed to understand my point. Her experience with the game of royals was evident, and I couldn't help but wonder if my mother had ever sought her help. I wouldn't be surprised. Amara was my mother's closest friend. "She's with Zane," Amara said, setting her rag down on the counter. "Don't ask me why or where, because I don't know." "Thank you, Amara," I said with genuine gratitude. "Don't thank me, Aura," Amara said with a frown. "Just keep Ember safe." I made my way down the hall, heading toward the one person who would know where to find Zane. "Come in." Dad called as I knocked on his office door. His voice carried a hint of stress and a lingering edge of anger. "Sorry to interrupt," I said with a sheepish smile. Dad was in the middle of a conversation with none other than Evander Winslow. Evander sat confidently in one of the leather chairs, a glass of dark alcohol in hand. His sandy hair was meticulously styled, and he was dressed to impress. "Princess Aurelia," Evander said, rising to his feet and approaching me. My gaze stayed locked on Dad as Evander leaned down and kissed my hand. Kira's disgust echoed in my head, and I had to stifle a snicker. "Hello, Evander," I replied once he finally lifted his alcohol-soaked lips from my hand. "What brings you here, Aura?" Dad asked, his Alpha King tone as firm as ever. "I needed to talk with you," I said, offering Dad a small, polite smile. "You're excused, Evander," Dad said with a stiff smile, indicating that Evander should leave. "I'll catch up with you later, Princess," Evander said, flashing me a dazzling smile before leaving the office. As the door closed behind him, Dad's guarded expression softened. He looked like someone who hadn't had much sleep. "Pompous, big-headed, arrogant, ignorant excuse for a lichen," Dad muttered, taking a deep sip from his glass. I couldn't help but chuckle, which quickly turned into full-blown laughter. Dad was usually the one who kept his emotions tightly controlled, while Mom wore hers openly. "I see you and Evander Winslow are great friends," I teased, settling into one of the leather chairs. Dad shot me an unamused look. "Very funny, Aura." "At least I'm not the only one who dislikes him," I said, grinning at Dad's exasperated expression. "In all my years, I haven't met a single person who genuinely likes the Winslow family." Dad said, rolling his eyes, "Consider yourself fortunate that the rest of his family couldn't make it to your birthday gala." "They're all that bad?" I asked, surprised. I'd been very lucky indeed. "Every last one of them," Dad grumbled. "Evander Winslow claims you want to name him your mate." I choked on the air I was breathing. "He said what?" I gasped, trying to catch my breath. "Exactly," Dad said, his smug smile widening. "He insists I don't know my own daughter." "I've never said I wanted him as a mate," I said, grimacing. "With the Winslow family, you don't need to say anything," Dad said, rolling his eyes. "They just assume. Always nagging." Dad's words trailed off as he seemed to listen to someone through the mind link. "I'm afraid I'll have to leave shortly," Dad said, clearing his throat and hiding something in his eyes. "Your uncle needs me." "I need to know which room Zane is staying in," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "I was simply looking to visit an old friend, nothing more." "Ah, I see," Dad said, seemingly oblivious to my true intention. "He's in the West Wing, second floor. Room 28, I believe." "Thanks," I said, turning to leave when another thought crossed my mind. "Could I ask a favor?" "It depends on what it is," Dad said, his smile turning wary. "I want a guard assigned to Ember," I said, my tone now serious. Dad picked up on the change immediately. "Why would she need a guard?" Dad asked, frowning. "She's very valuable to me," I said, my words carrying the weight of our ancestral power. "I want to keep her safe." "Understood," Dad said, nodding as he felt the effect of my power-laced words. "I'll find someone suitable for Ember." "Thank you," I said, smiling. "Preferably someone from your inner circle." "She must be very valuable if she needs someone of that rank," Dad noted, and I gave him a small, knowing smile. Dad clearly understood the game I was playing, though he had never actively participated. "She is," I confirmed. "Plus, Amara would have my head if anything happened to her." Dad chuckled, and I finally turned to leave. His last words sent a shiver down my spine. "Aura," Dad called out, and I looked back at him. "Be very careful. Your mother thought she could handle playing too." "My fate is different from Mom's," I said, my voice sounding strange, as if it belonged to someone else. I wasn't even sure where the words had come from. They slipped out of my mouth without warning. Though their origin was unclear, their truth was undeniable. Mom's death had been a horrific tragedy, one I was convinced had been orchestrated by someone of high rank or a royal. Dad had never uncovered the real cause, settling instead on calling it a rogue attack. I knew playing the same game was risky, but I couldn't remain passive. Dad was an exceptional ruler, that much was evident. Our kingdom thrived while others faltered. I couldn't help but wonder how many lives had been lost elsewhere because Dad refused to engage in the same ruthless politics. I made my way to the west wing of the mansion, trudging up the stairs to the second floor. Just as I was about to knock on room 24, Magnus's gloved hand stopped me. He gently grasped my hand, signaling for silence with a finger pressed to his lips. Only then did I hear the hushed voices from inside. Magnus released my hand and nodded toward the door. I closed my eyes, straining to catch snippets of the conversation. I recognized Ember and Zane's voices. "The fewer who know, the better," Zane said, his tone tinged with frustration. "She has a right to know, Zane," Ember replied, her voice equally heated. "I know," Zane began, but was cut off by Ember's interruption. Ember's voice dropped to a whisper. "Someone's listening." I swallowed the unease and irritation bubbling in my stomach and knocked on the door. For a moment there was silence. Then Zane opened the door, his expression guarded but breaking into a smile when he saw me. "Aura," he said warmly, pulling me into a hug. "I'm sorry I haven't been around." "It's fine," I said, returning his smile. "Can I come in?" "Of course," Zane chuckled. I stepped into Zane's suite, glancing around. Ember was nowhere to be seen, clearly hiding. "Ember," I called, rolling my eyes. "I know you're here." Ember emerged from the bathroom, looking apologetic. "Can I have a word with Ember?" I asked Zane with a polite smile. "Are you kicking me out of my own room?" Zane raised an eyebrow in mock outrage. All right, I'm going." Zane left, and I waited until his footsteps faded into silence before speaking. "Anything you need to tell me?" I asked, raising an eyebrow at Ember. "I could be asking you the same thing," Ember shot back, her tone defiant. "It's not that simple," I sighed. My plan was underway. The more people knew, the slimmer the chance of its success. "It never is," Ember said, settling on the sofa with a frown. "Is there something going on between you and Zane?" I asked, arching an eyebrow. Ember blushed deeply and waved off the question. "You know better than to ask that." "Nothing like that is going on between me and Zane," she said, rolling her eyes. "If you say so," I teased. "We're working on something," Ember said, her expression grim. Her honey-colored eyes held a wealth of hidden knowledge. "Can't you tell me?" I asked, frowning. "If it makes you feel better, I'll send Magnus away." "No," Ember shook her head. "Let Magnus stay. He's the one who's going to keep you alive." I glanced at Magnus, butterflies fluttering in my stomach as his dark eyes locked onto mine. "Someone's put a hit out on you," Ember said, her voice tight. "Well, that explains why people keep trying to kill me," I murmured, recalling the incidents at the party with Vesper and my birthday gala. "It's more than that," Ember said quietly. "The amount of money they're offering is staggering." "What does that have to do with what you and Zane were talking about?" I asked. "A month ago, Zane heard a rumor," Ember explained. "A drunk guy was causing a scene in his kingdom and ended up spilling some information. He talked about a pretty green-eyed princess these men were hired to kill." "He was talking about me?" I frowned. "He had a picture and everything," Ember said, her gaze shifting to the window. "Zane couldn't get much from him, but he figured the guy had picked up the photo from one of the men hired to kill you." "What does that have to do with your plan?" I asked. I didn't want Ember putting herself in danger for me. "We're trying to find out who ordered the hit," Ember said with a sigh. "Zane's kingdom might be small, but he has loyal people, and there are many who want to help you." "Help me?" I was surprised. Sure, Dad was a great ruler, but why would they want to help me? "Yup," Ember nodded, her honey eyes meeting mine. "You have a lot of friends, Aurelia. 1/3 of the world wants to kill me, another third wants to help me, and the last third wants to marry me," I groaned, letting out a tired chuckle. Ember's eyes twinkled with humor. "Well, I don't want you dead, and I definitely don't want to marry you. Guess that makes me team good guys." "Gee, and here I thought you were trying to take my place as my mate," I smirked as Ember rolled her eyes. "Hell, my job as an assistant is hard enough," Ember said, shaking her head. "No way do I need to rule." I glanced at the clock on the wall. It was nearing 3 o'clock, and I needed to return to my room quickly. "That reminds me," I said, forcing the words out. "I'm assigning you a bodyguard." Ember's eyes widened. "Aurelia, I don't need a damn bodyguard," she huffed. "Didn't you hear what I just said? No one can know about what Zane and I are doing." "I understand," I said firmly, "but I'm not leaving you unprotected." "No one's after me, Aura," Ember shook her head. "They're after you." "Everyone important to me is at risk," I said. "That includes you." "You're not going to change your mind about this, are you?" Ember asked, frowning. No, I said, shaking my head. It'll be someone from Dad's inner circle, someone we can all trust. All right, Ember said with a resigned sigh. Not that I have any say in the matter. There's one more thing I need to ask, I said, smiling sheepishly. Ember raised an eyebrow. Uh-huh? Could you keep an eye on Dylan for me? I asked, my expression serious. He's terrified, and I have a bad feeling something is going to happen to him. I'm not a warrior, Aura, Ember huffed. If someone tries to kill him, I can't protect him. I shook my head. His mom and sister work behind the scenes. If Dylan was going to die, I doubt it would be a grand spectacle. I don't think they'd send someone to murder him. Ember paused for a moment. I agree. If Dylan's going to die, I'd bet good money they're the cause. I would too, I nodded. Just shadow him. Don't let him out of your sight, and make sure he doesn't eat anything that Lily or Daisy have touched. All right, Ember said, nodding, but I expect a promotion. Deal, I grinned. I headed back to my room quickly, with Magnus following closely behind. As we stepped into my suite, Magnus checked to make sure no one was listening. 1 hour, Magnus murmured, his obsidian eyes intense. Come back to me, I pleaded, genuinely worried for his safety. Magnus, in a deliberate and slow motion, ran his gloved hand down my cheek. I shivered at the touch, longing for his skin against mine, and recoiled at the thought, reminded of my mate. Without another word, Magnus left, but our eyes conveyed everything we needed to say. That hour felt like an eternity, one of the longest I'd endured in my life. My mind raced, conjuring every grim possibility where Magnus might never return, erased from my life forever. It was selfish of me to send him, I knew that, but he was the only one I could rely on. I couldn't trust anyone else with the task, and Magnus had the skill to come and go unnoticed, something I couldn't manage without drawing attention. When Magnus slipped silently through my bedroom door, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Relief washed over me as my eyes scanned his towering form for any signs of injury. He looked just as he had before, his tousled dark hair, piercing eyes, and not a single scratch. Did you doubt me? Magnus broke the silence, his tone curious, not mocking. I shook my head. After watching you take down 4 guys on your own, I've moved beyond underestimating you. He nodded, seemingly satisfied with my response. I wanted to ask about his mission, to know what information he had gathered, but I couldn't risk speaking openly. Ember had been right. There were always people listening, especially now with the other royals in our kingdom. The Beaumont family posed the biggest threat, followed by the Lancasters. Evander, with all his irritating antics, didn't seem to have the brains to mastermind anything on his own. He was just a puppet, carrying out orders from others. Magnus left me alone with my thoughts for the evening. A dinner cart was brought up, and I ate in silence, my mind bouncing between my hastily devised plan and the conversation I'd had with my uncle. I knew he'd expect a decision by tomorrow, and I was determined to make the right one. The next morning, I woke late, only to be greeted by a hurried knock at the door. Come in, I called, groggily noticing Magnus standing at attention by the door as always. Ember's head poked in, with a sleep-rumpled Dylan trailing behind her. Get in here, Ember hissed, pulling Dylan into the room by his wrist. He glared at her, his orange hair a mess. Clearly, he hadn't been expecting to be dragged out of bed so early. Quite the assistant you've got there, Princess, Dylan muttered, avoiding Ember's sharp look. Listen, royal boy, I'm only stuck with you because Aura asked, Ember snapped back, her irritation evident. Best friends already? I raised an eyebrow at their exchange, amused despite the situation. Ember wasn't the type to care about titles or status. She judged people by their actions. You're hilarious, Aura. Ember rolled her eyes, collapsing onto the couch. I turned to Dylan, frowning. How'd you manage to get away from your family? By being ripped out of bed, Dylan grumbled. And you're lucky I did, Ember retorted. Your mom and sister haven't let you out of their sight. You're fortunate they don't see me as a threat. She sounded more annoyed than usual, and I wondered if she'd had her own run-in with members of the Lancaster family. I'll take that as a blessing, Dylan mumbled. One less person who wants me dead. Blessing, Ember scoffed. They think I'm just some servant with a crush on the mighty Lancaster heir. I couldn't help but snort, and Ember shot me a look that conveyed her frustration. It was strange to find these small moments of levity amidst the danger and deception surrounding us. A brief reprieve to laugh, but it couldn't last. Unfortunately, we should probably let them keep thinking that way, I said apologetically. Ember crossed her arms. You know, I'm thinking I deserve a pay raise along with that promotion. I chuckled. I don't even pay you. Exactly, she huffed. If I'm going to be in the middle of all this, I deserve some decent pay and benefits. That can be arranged, I smiled. She'd more than earned it. Good, Ember nodded, her frustration softening. She turned to Dylan. Now, tell Aura what you told me. Dylan sighed, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else, but fear flickered in his eyes. My mom and sister are up to something, Dylan said, his gaze darting nervously around the room. I'm sure you already know that. I do, I nodded. They're not exactly subtle about it. They're only acting that way with you, Dylan frowned. They want your alliance. You'd be their most powerful ally. I have no intention of letting that happen, I assured him, and I don't think my father does either. They don't care about your dad. It's you they want, Dylan said. Me? I raised an eyebrow. If they could align themselves with you, they wouldn't need anyone else. Your kingdom's been the largest for 1,000 years. You're the first Alpha Queen in history. That's worth something. I ignored the implications of his statement, focusing on something else. Their other allies? The Beaumont family, Dylan said in a hushed tone. I felt Magnus tense beside me, though I doubted anyone else noticed. It was a subtle reaction, but I knew what it meant. His opinion of the Beaumonts was clear. They were at my gala, I said, pursing my lips. Seems like they want me on their side, too. Don't underestimate them, Dylan warned, his fear palpable. They've been playing the game for centuries. They don't want you. They want your land, your throne, and your life. I've met their sons, I said, thinking back to the event. They can try, but they won't take anything from me. They've already started, Dylan replied grimly. What do you mean? I asked. A month ago, I overheard my mom and sister talking about an attack they planned, Dylan explained. It was supposed to happen at a nightclub in your kingdom. The memory hit me like a punch. The night I went out with Vesper. If it hadn't been for Magnus, those men would have succeeded. I remember that, I muttered, frowning. They failed then, and they'll keep failing. For both our sakes, I hope you're right, Princess, Dylan replied. The Lancaster family won't stop until they get what they want. They know my mom and sister are after you, and they're dead set on preventing that. Why do they even want me? I huffed in frustration. Why can't they just be satisfied with what they already have? Dylan's smile was grim. That's how people who've never craved power think. Those hungry for it will always want more. It's never enough. You sound like you speak from experience, I pointed out. He shook his head. Not from me, but you've met my mom and sister. You can probably relate by now. Ember glanced at the clock, catching Dylan's gaze. We need to get going. Your mom and sister will get suspicious. Wait, what were you trying to tell me earlier? I asked, frowning. Dylan turned to meet my eyes, his expression serious. If anything happens to me, know that my mom and sister are responsible. Avenge my death. Don't ever let them take the throne. You have my word, I nodded, my heart clenching at the thought of Dylan meeting such a fate at the hands of his own family. It was hard to imagine betraying your own flesh and blood like that. I couldn't fathom turning against my father for the throne. Let's move, Ember grunted, tousling her curls with her fingers. I raised a brow at her. What was that about? I asked, eyeing her now messy hair. They think Dylan and I, Ember grimaced deeply, clearly uncomfortable. They think we're sleeping together. Dylan rolled his eyes and walked out of my room, as if this sort of thing was completely normal for him. One last thing, Ember whispered, leaning in close. I overheard your uncle talking with a guard. They've captured one of the masked men from the gala attack. I think they've been torturing him. I'm not entirely sure of the details, but it seems they're really close to finding out who was behind it. They left quickly, but the knot in my stomach remained. I really hoped nothing would happen to Dylan. We needed his kingdom on our side, especially with him at the helm. It wasn't too surprising to learn that the Beaumont family had tried to kill me that night at the club. From the moment I met them, I sensed there was something off. Dylan's warning only confirmed my suspicions. After Ember and Dylan left, I made my way to see my uncle. I had finally come to a decision, one I knew I wouldn't regret. I knocked on his office door and entered when I heard his voice. He was hunched over a mountain of paperwork, his curly hair in disarray. I could practically feel the frustration radiating off him in waves. It was obvious that he and Dad were still stressed. "Aura," Uncle Orion greeted me with a grin, though his eyes quickly flicked back to the documents. "What brings you here?" "Well, it's about what we talked about yesterday," I chuckled softly. It wasn't surprising that Uncle had already forgotten our conversation. His attention shifted from the papers. "You've been thinking about what I asked?" "I have," I nodded. "I think you're right. I don't want Kira to be at risk again." "It's for the best, Aura," he said with a sympathetic smile. "It took your mother a long time to control the necklace. I expect it to be returned to me when the time is right," I replied, offering him a polite smile. "Of course, Aura." Uncle Orion's eyes softened with affection. "You're just as strong as your mother. I have no doubt that when the time comes, you'll be more than ready." Reaching behind my neck, I unclasped the intricate necklace I had been wearing for weeks. Unlike before, there was no warmth or familiar tingle from the jewelry. It felt cold in my hands as I gently placed it on Uncle Orion's desk. "Where will you keep it?" I asked, a frown tugging at my lips. "I don't want anything to happen to it, especially with all these royals in the house." "It'll never leave my side," he assured me, wrapping the necklace in a thin cloth and tucking it into his pocket. After handing Uncle Orion the necklace, it felt as though a tremendous weight had lifted off my shoulders. Despite knowing my intentions were good, the thought of losing Kira, even temporarily, filled me with dread. Uncle Orion had given me the guidance I needed, and for that, I was grateful. I remained in my room well into the afternoon, lost in thought until the arrival of the dinner cart pulled me back to reality. "You can leave it here," I smiled at the servant, an older woman who returned my gesture warmly. "When you're done, just place it outside your door, Princess," she replied before leaving. I ate in silence, my mind swirling in 100 different directions. One thing that frustrated me was my inability to connect with my mate at will. Our bond wasn't something I could always tap into. It worked both ways. I could only sense his emotions or hear his thoughts when he allowed it. Lately, though, it seemed like he had put up a wall, a barrier preventing me from accessing anything. I attempted to construct my own mental fortress, something to shield my deepest thoughts and feelings from him, but it was far harder than I expected. No matter how hard I tried, my defenses crumbled like dust. My thoughts and emotions lay bare for my mate to see, and I could only hope he wasn't aligned with the wrong side. The fact that he could hide so much from me spoke to his discipline and strength, qualities I needed in an ally now more than ever. Even though I often felt isolated, I knew I had people I could trust. I believed my father would listen if I approached him with my concerns, and I was confident he already saw through the likes of Daisy and Lily Lancaster. Most people couldn't fool him. Ember and Magnus were my lifelines during these trying times. It was almost funny how I felt more comfortable confiding royal secrets in my bodyguard than anyone else. Ember, too, had quickly become a trusted confidant, guiding me in ways no one else could. My thoughts were interrupted by the sight of a crisp sheet of paper tucked beneath my dinner plate. It sat on the cart, beckoning me with its quiet mystery. A note. Kira's voice pierced through my mind. She still wasn't happy that I had handed over the necklace to Uncle Orion, despite her trust in him. She had insisted we keep it with us at all times. "It's probably nothing, just something from one of the servants," I muttered, picking up the small card. As I twisted it between my fingers, the sharp corner of the paper sliced into the soft skin of my fingertip. A single drop of crimson blood stained the pristine card. "Meet me in the gardens tomorrow night at 11 o'clock. There are things your mother never told you, things that would surprise even you. Come alone." The note sent a chill down my spine, an unsettling mix of dread and impatience coursing through me. It was a feeling I hadn't quite experienced in my time as royalty. "This could be dangerous," Kira cautioned, her tone serious. "I don't think we should go." "How can we not?" I countered. "They know something about Mom." Whoever had written this knew exactly how to get my attention. They knew just what bait to dangle, and I couldn't resist. I had no choice but to go. My mind raced, already formulating a plan to slip into the gardens unnoticed. The note had specifically said to come alone, which meant they knew about Magnus. I'd have to be careful, very careful, not to tip him off. Before I could think further, a frantic knock on my bedroom door shattered the silence. The urgency behind it sent my nerves on edge. Before I could even say, "Come in," the door flew open. Magnus burst into the room from the adjoining door, his body tensed, prepared for battle. His hair was tousled, and he wore only a tank top and loose shorts, nothing like his usual guarded attire. His gloves were gone, leaving his hands bare, and for the first time I saw him without his usual armor. My eyes drank in the sight of him, lingering on every exposed inch of his skin. As Magnus scanned the room, Ember burst in, her expression wild with shock. She was trembling, her breath coming in ragged gasps as if she had run a great distance. "You, Magnus, coming." Ember struggled to speak, unable to complete the sentence that would change everything. "Ember, breathe," I urged, shutting the door behind her and guiding her to the couch. I handed her a glass of water, which she drank faster than I'd ever seen anyone drink. "No time," Ember gasped, slamming the empty glass onto the table, her eyes wide with panic. Her eyes were locked on Magnus, burning with a knowledge that made my stomach drop. I leaned in closer, trying to catch her gaze. "No time for what?" I pressed, urgency creeping into my voice. Ember kept her focus on Magnus, her eyes flickering back to me intermittently. "The guy they caught," Ember panted, struggling to catch her breath. "He confessed." "He confessed?" I urged, my voice trembling. "Who? Who did he name?" "Magnus," Ember exhaled heavily. "He named Magnus." The news hit me like a punch to the gut. It was inconceivable. There was no way Magnus could have orchestrated the attack at my birthday gala. The disbelief roared inside me, screaming that this was a setup, a ploy to frame him. "He didn't do this, Ember." I shook my head, my voice filled with conviction. "I know he didn't." "I know," Ember nodded, her own disbelief evident. "It wasn't Magnus." We turned our attention to Magnus, whose eyes, usually so steady, now held a flicker of shock mixed with admiration and resolve. No matter what, I wouldn't rest until Magnus was cleared. My father had to listen. Someone had to take this seriously. "You don't have much time," Ember said urgently, turning to Magnus. "They're coming for you." Magnus moved with a speed that seemed almost supernatural. Within moments, he was back with a black duffel bag slung over his shoulder. "No, no, no," I murmured, the gravity of the situation sinking in. Magnus couldn't stay. It was too dangerous. With the confession, no one would believe him now. The truth was twisted, and the blame laid squarely on his shoulders. He had no allies left, only Ember and me. He would never survive if he stayed. The thought of losing him, of him disappearing from my life, was more terrifying than anything I had faced before. "Shh," Magnus said softly, stepping closer to me. I hadn't realized I was shaking until Magnus approached. His presence, his scent, gave me a strange strength, enough to let him leave. I was willing to sacrifice everything for his safety. Magnus reached the window and threw it open with raw power. I followed, feeling an overwhelming urge to be with him, to escape with him. "Don't," I started, my voice faltering. How could I ask him to stay? It felt selfish to plead with him, to risk his life for my own fears and insecurities. Magnus was halfway out the window, and my heart followed him. "Remember what I asked," I managed to say through trembling lips, hoping he understood my plea. In a moment that took me completely by surprise, Magnus cupped my face in his hands and kissed me deeply. The kiss was electric. Sparks surged through me, invigorating my senses and mending my fractured heart. His touch, warm and grounding, was unlike anything I had ever felt. I knew this moment would haunt me, but in a way that made me understand why I could never let him go. He was a part of me, as I was a part of him. Our kiss was the perfect harmony of our souls and bodies, finally aligned. As our lips parted, I felt a profound connection, an acknowledgement of our bond that had always existed but was now undeniable. Magnus's emotions, his fear for me, were raw and unfamiliar to him, revealing a depth of feeling I had not seen before. Our kiss was too brief, and as he pulled away with visible reluctance, I felt a pang of loss. He looked back at me one last time before jumping from the window. "Mate," I whispered, my voice a mix of anguish and realization. Almost immediately, my bedroom door burst open, and nearly every guard in the mansion rushed in. Flashback. I need a favor, I said, my eyes pleading as I looked at Magnus. I can't trust just anyone with this. Magnus paused, his dark eyes searching mine with an intensity that made my heart race. What favor do you need? I managed to suppress a smile as his thick accent filled the room. I need a replica of this necklace, I said, gesturing to the one hanging from my neck. I need it as soon as possible. Magnus's curiosity deepened as he studied the necklace. Why do you need something like that? My uncle wants me to give him this necklace, I explained, shrugging. He says I'm not ready for it. I'm not sure what his intentions are, but I want to be cautious. Magnus stepped closer, his gloved hand hovering over the necklace. I cringed internally, worried it might affect him as it had the men who had sneaked into my room. But the necklace remained cold against my skin, showing no reaction to Magnus's touch. Perhaps it sensed he meant no harm, or perhaps it knew he wasn't interested in stealing it. I can do this, Magnus said, nodding, but I'll need a picture. He pulled out his phone and took a photo of the necklace. I'll make a call, he added before retreating to his room. I waited anxiously, though it felt like hours, when in reality it was only a few minutes. I needed that necklace soon. The clock was ticking, and I couldn't delay my uncle forever. When Magnus returned, I practically leapt from my bed. Tomorrow, he said firmly. He'll have it ready by tomorrow. I frowned. How much will it cost? No money, Magnus said with a shake of his head. He wants secrets. Secrets? I scoffed. He wants secrets? Secrets more valuable than money, Magnus replied with a shrug as if he were used to this sort of exchange. Before my gala, I would have disagreed with you, I said with a humorless chuckle. Now I think you might be right. I'm often right, Magnus said with a shrug, though I could see his lips twitching beneath his mask. When I give my uncle the fake necklace, I'll need someone to follow it, I said, my frown deepening. I want to know where it ends up. And what if he keeps it? Magnus asked. What if he's true to his word? Then he'll never know the necklace was a fake, I replied. He doesn't need to know our plans. I'll have someone follow it, Magnus said. Someone I trust. You trust people? I smirked, amusement dancing in my eyes. How strange. Very funny, little princess, Magnus said, his rough voice holding a rare note of amusement. If his cursed mask weren't on, I might have seen a smile. How will the necklace get here? I asked, my mind racing with concerns. I can't see anyone getting past all the guards. I'll go, Magnus said decisively. You'll stay in the room. I'll meet the contact and pick up the necklace. This won't be dangerous, will it? I asked, worried for his safety. Magnus shrugged. Everything is dangerous. I rolled my eyes at my towering bodyguard. Showering isn't dangerous. There are plenty of things that aren't dangerous, Magnus. You slip, you fall, you hit your head, you die. Magnus shrugged as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. You know, you're a lot more fun when you're not all silent and brooding, I teased, a smirk on my face. I do not brood, Magnus said, raising an eyebrow. In that moment, he looked more handsome than ever. Present day, Magnus. Ember's words ignited a blaze of fury within me. I knew who was behind the attack and the false accusations. Their plan had backfired spectacularly. While their attack had failed, they had gained one crucial piece of information. They now knew about the necklace Aurelia wore, a piece of jewelry with unimaginable power. It made me feel a grim satisfaction to know that Tiberius had been among the 10 men Aurelia had killed. She had avenged her mother's murder without even realizing it, sparing her from ever having to confront the man who had done it. Fang and I were both ecstatic and tormented. Aurelia now understood the truth about us, yet she didn't reject or despise me. Her emotions, fear for my safety, longing, and self-anger, flooded me. She had felt the connection from the beginning, but had never taken the chance to touch me. Had she not been the first Queen Alpha in history, and I not come with a haunted past, things might have been simpler. She didn't want me to leave, yet she knew I must. Her determination to clear my name was clear. But one thought gnawed at me. Who would protect Aurelia while I was gone? I leaped from the window with ease, imprinting Aurelia Carrington's emerald eyes in my memory. Without hesitation, I plunged into the forest. I hadn't gone far when a familiar, taunting chuckle reached my ears. I spun around, claws extending in readiness to tear out the intruder's throat. Здравствуйте, Magnus. Hello, Magnus. Mason Beaumont's mocking voice greeted me. Mason, I growled, forcing myself to maintain composure. Mason reveled in provoking reactions, enjoying the twisted game he played. He was a sociopath who thrived on manipulating others. Что ты сделал сейчас, Magnus? What have you done now, Magnus? Mason taunted, his cruel smirk widening. You've been busy, it seems, I said, reining in my anger. Fang was barely contained, craving retribution for Mason's sins. Какая жалость, что маленькая принцесса оказалась в опасности. Ее отцу следовало узнать вашу настоящую личность, прежде чем нанять вас. Можно было спасти много жизней. Such a shame that the little princess was in danger. Her father should have known your true identity before hiring you. Many lives could have been saved. You underestimate her, I snarled, Fang's voice merging with mine. She will be your downfall, Mason, and I'll be there to witness every moment. If you say so, Mason shrugged nonchalantly. Goodbye, big brother. Magnus was gone. Actually gone. I had just discovered who my mate was, only to lose him in a matter of seconds. Nothing made sense except the overwhelming longing I could feel from him, and the maddening urge to chase after him into the darkness. Ember stood silently, her eyes reflecting a quiet acceptance. I didn't bother asking if she had known all along. At this point, nothing would surprise me. She likely figured it out weeks ago. Kira's voice screamed inside me, berating us both for our blindness. It's strange how the signs can be right in front of you, yet you remain oblivious until it's too late. The odd pull I felt toward Magnus, the constant need to be near him, to touch him, all a result of the mate bond. The gloves he always wore, never leaving his side. A small part of me wondered why he hid the truth from me, but it didn't matter now. He was gone, accused of a crime he could never commit. I tore my gaze from the window, locking eyes with Uncle Orion. Find your father, Kira urged, her voice frantic. Dad could fix this. He had to. He'd believe me, understand the truth, and find a way to bring Magnus back to me, where he belonged. Where's Dad? I asked, my voice tight as I tried to still my shaking hands. Uncle Orion wasn't with Dad or the guards. Why not? Instead, a head of pale blonde hair emerged from behind Uncle Orion's shoulder. Lily's sharp eyes fixed on my face, taking in the flushed cheeks and bruised lips. I wondered if she could see what had just happened, if she was smart enough to connect the dots, and what that might mean for Magnus and me. He's not here, Lily hissed, her gaze flicking toward Uncle Orion. What's going on? I demanded, my voice rising as I noticed the determined look on my uncle's face. Aura, he began, but my low growl forced him to drop the pretense. We have enough evidence to believe Magnus was behind the attack at your birthday gala. That's ridiculous, I growled back. Why would he save me only to turn around and try to kill me? Lily clicked her tongue, her expression cold. Poor girl, he must have her completely twisted up. No one has me twisted, Lily, I snapped, narrowing my eyes as I took in her small frame. The triumph in her gaze was undeniable, though her face remained impassive. Her mask was flawless, while mine had cracked wide open. I'm finding my father, I said sharply, grabbing Ember's hand and marching toward Uncle Orion and the guards. Aura, your father's unwell. The stress is getting to him, Uncle Orion sighed. Let him rest tonight. His words sent a chill through me, but I couldn't wait until morning. If I did, they would catch Magnus. Dad was the Alpha King. This was his responsibility. He always taught me that mates came before everything else, and I wasn't about to wait while Magnus was being hunted. Something had to be done now. I'm going to see him, Uncle. My voice trembled with barely contained power, the authority passed down from my father thrumming in my veins. The air around us grew heavy as the guards shifted, their eyes drawn to me. Aura, Uncle Orion started again. Move, I ordered, and Ember tucked herself closer behind me. The guards obeyed without hesitation. To defy the royal family was against their very oath. Uncle Orion was only the king's brother. I was his heir. My word overruled his, and we both knew it. After a moment of hesitation, Uncle Orion stepped aside, Lily following suit, her face still void of any emotion. With Ember's wrist still in my grasp, I hurried down the hall as fast as I could. You were scary back there, Ember murmured, shaking her head, her curls bouncing with each step. I released a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I'm sorry for dragging you into this. She frowned, her voice gentle. I think I need to be in this. Did you know? I asked softly, my voice barely above a whisper. Ember went quiet, but the truth was in her eyes. Yes, I knew, she admitted with a nod. How long? I pressed, locking eyes with her. A while, she said with a frown. But it wasn't my place to tell. I shook my head. No, I don't blame you. I should have realized it sooner. You've had a lot going on. Ember offered a wry smile, which I returned, though mine lacked the strength. What's it like? She asked, her brow furrowed as she kept pace with me while we practically sprinted down the hallway. With him gone? It's like a piece of me went missing with him, I admitted, my voice raw. The mate bond isn't just about love. It's about someone holding the other half of your soul. Magnus has always had mine. I just didn't see it in time. We'll get him back, Aura. Determination flickered in Ember's honey-colored eyes. We'll get him back, save Dylan, figure out who's really behind the attack, and take care of these snakes. I hope so, I muttered, the bitterness in my laugh unmistakable. Right now, too many people want me dead, and I'm down one bodyguard. We hurried toward my dad's suite, my mind too scattered to bother mind-linking him. I was too focused on reaching out, desperately trying to sense Magnus through the mate bond. It was there, solid in my head, and at one point I could feel his emotions. If only there were a way to reach him, everything might fall into place. My mind raced, trying to plan Magnus's rescue while also figuring out how to save Dylan from his family's twisted grasp. The two situations were beginning to blur together in my head. Clearing Magnus's name was urgent, but his disappearance might help us deal with Dylan's family. I knocked hard on my dad's door, not waiting for him to invite me in before barging through. Ember followed close behind. She had every right to be in on this. Her loyalty was unwavering, and whatever she learned would only help us. They took him, I panted, my breath coming in ragged bursts. The fear, pressure, and sense of loss threatened to crush me, but I couldn't break, not while Magnus was in danger. Dad sat across the room, a glass of amber liquid in one hand, a paper in the other. His eyes told me he already knew what had happened. My heart pounded, wondering how he could have let this happen. I see, he murmured, rising from his seat. Dad, what's going on? My voice wavered between panic and anger. Aura, we'll fix this. He nodded, his tone doing nothing to calm me. So you know? I snapped. You know he didn't do this? I do, he nodded again, but there was something unsaid in his eyes. Is it because he's my mate? My voice edged with anger, the words bitter on my tongue. Dad's expression flickered with surprise. I suppose he couldn't hide it forever. Then what are we going to do? I pressed. How do we get him back? He hesitated, looking at me as if unsure whether I was still his little girl or had become the powerful ruler I was destined to be. That hesitation, that inability to see me as anything other than his daughter, was why he kept me in the dark for so long. But I was done being treated as the child he wanted to protect. I was ready to act. If I have to do this alone, I will. My voice steadied, calm and commanding. Power hummed beneath my words, flowing through me as though it had a will of its own, always ready to come to my aid when I needed it most. The power I wielded as the future Alpha Queen was different from Dad's. His surrounded him like thick layers of sandpaper, abrasive and undeniable. Mine was sharp, cold, battering those who stood in its way like icy winds. Dad's eyes flashed with recognition as he felt it. The Lancaster and Winslow families are calling for Magnus's head, Dad said quietly, his eyes searching mine. What do you make of that? I fought back the frustration rising in me. This wasn't the time for one of his lessons. This was the time for action. I glanced at Ember, her honey eyes meeting mine. We were of the same mind. They're up to something, I said with conviction. They're trying to distract us. Magnus is my bodyguard and a damn good one. Of course they want him out of the way. Dad nodded thoughtfully. I agree. Something feels off, but we can't afford to rush this. Impatience leads to mistakes. For what it's worth, Ember said softly, her eyes flicking between Dad and me, I think I know who's responsible for the attack at the gala. She had Dad's full attention now, and I almost pitied her, facing the intensity of his gaze. But she didn't waver. I didn't understand the language, she continued, but one of the masked men mentioned a name. The one who aimed his gun at Magnus. He said something about Mason Beaumont. I knew it was impossible, but I still wanted a quick fix. I needed Magnus back, and I needed his name cleared. My dad was right, though. Nothing was going to happen instantly. There were too many enemies, too many people who wanted us off the throne. When my dad's expression darkened at the mention of Mason Beaumont, I saw the rage flash in his eyes. It was clear there was a deep hatred there. "Why do you hate them so much?" I asked, studying the deep lines on his face. His eyes were practically burning with loathing, and it wasn't just for Mason, it was for the entire Beaumont family. "That's a story for another time," he muttered, turning to refill his glass. "Dad," I scowled, frustrated, "you can't keep me in the dark anymore. Can't you see it's not helping?" Something passed over his eyes, something cold and cruel, a side of my father I had never seen. It reminded me of Mason Beaumont, that same icy glint in his eyes. "Ask me anything else, Aura," he said, his voice hard, unyielding. "Some things are better left in the dark." Realizing I wouldn't get any more from him, I turned to leave, frustration simmering inside me. "Aura?" His voice was softer now, almost tired. It stopped me in my tracks. I turned back and saw him looking more exhausted than ever. Dark circles rimmed his eyes, and for the first time he seemed vulnerable. A wave of panic hit me. "You and Dylan Lancaster, you're close?" His brow arched as he waited for me to respond. "Yes," I replied cautiously. "I trust Dylan." "Well," Dad began, his lips pressed into a thin line, "in 4 days, the Lancaster family will be returning to their own kingdom." I frowned at his words. Once Dylan was back in his own territory, it would be impossible to protect him. Lily would have countless people under her control, all ready to do her bidding. "If you plan on helping him, do it before he leaves," Dad said, taking a sip from his glass. There was a hidden warning in his words. It hit me then. If Dylan left, there would be no one to save him. His family would be the end of him. They might not kill him directly, but Lily and her daughter would pull the strings to ensure his demise. "Why not just say it outright?" Kira, my wolf, murmured in my mind. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. My dad didn't even glance away from me as he called for the person to enter. A young man rolled in a silver dining cart, his eyes darting nervously between the three of us. "Dinner, Alpha King," he said politely, bowing before unveiling the meal. "Remember what I said, Aura," Dad grunted, his tone heavy with meaning. "And take care tonight. I'm sure Ember wouldn't mind staying over. Just keep your voices down. The walls are thin." I tried not to let my confusion show as Ember and I left the room. His cryptic warning wasn't lost on me, but it only added to the mounting pressure. As soon as we closed the door behind us, I turned to Ember. "What was that about?" She silenced me with a finger to her lips and then tapped her finger against the wall. I stared at her, completely lost, until she rolled her eyes and pointed to her ear. "Oh, of course." I let out a frustrated sigh. My dad's riddles were all starting to make sense. He was warning us. Someone was listening. Most likely, Lily or her daughter were behind it. But without proof, what could we do? We couldn't accuse them, let alone act on it, not without risking war, not without undeniable evidence. "Don't be too hard on yourself," Kira murmured. "It's been a long night." Ember and I walked down the hallway, our footsteps echoing in the quiet. "Looks like I'm staying over tonight," Ember said with a dry chuckle. "Not that I'd get any sleep anyway." "Same here," I nodded, threading my arm through hers. We were both exhausted, but sleep felt impossible. We collapsed onto my bed, both lost in our thoughts. How could we talk when there might be someone listening? Would we have to speak in riddles from now on? Ember rested her head dramatically on my shoulder, and I couldn't help but chuckle as her curls spilled over me. "You sure you don't feel anything for Zane?" I teased, trying to lighten the mood. I grinned wider when she rolled her eyes and let out a snort. "As if I have time for guys in the middle of all this," she muttered, shaking her head as her curls tickled my face. "There's always time for guys," I said with a smirk. "You're starting to sound a lot like Vesper," she chuckled lowly. "Speaking of Vesper, where has she been?" I asked, feeling a pang of guilt for not checking on my friend sooner. "Her mom's been a bit overbearing lately," Ember shrugged. "Almost dying and all that." "I get it," I chuckled softly. "Seems like I'm a magnet for these kinds of crises lately." "Well, you've got some solid people in your corner," Ember said thoughtfully. "2 future kings, Your dad, your uncle, a massive bodyguard, and a beautiful would-be psychic. Let me guess, Amara's the psychic? I asked with a teasing tone, laughing when Ember nudged me playfully. I rolled onto my side on the bed, chuckling as Ember's lips curved into a genuine smile. You're lucky you're not a stuck-up royal like that Lancaster girl, Ember smirked, her mocha curls bouncing with her movements. Her golden eyes sparkled with humor. Oh, you'd still be my friend, I teased back. I'd probably give you a hard time, but yeah, Ember said, shaking her head with a grin. I'd still be your friend. That was one of the things I loved most about Ember. She didn't care about titles or ranks. Sure, I was the future Alpha Queen, but that didn't mean I needed to be treated like some otherworldly being. I was still just a person, prone to mistakes, and I was grateful for someone like Ember, who would tell me exactly how she felt. You'd really smack around the future Alpha Queen? I gasped dramatically, clutching my heart. Damn right I would, Ember said with a chuckle. I'm human. If I hurt you, then there's definitely something wrong. Ember and I spent most of the night chatting, our laughter sometimes erupting into fits of giggles. These moments of normalcy were a welcome respite from the chaos. They reminded me of the importance of happiness and laughter, especially in dark times. Choosing Ember as my assistant was one of the best decisions I'd ever made. She was a true friend, always honest and steadfast. Despite how the royals liked to underestimate her, I was thankful for that. They didn't need to know the truth about her abilities. Ember had a knack for noticing everything, uncovering secrets others wanted to keep hidden. She had a rare gift for seeing past people's masks. She was just a human, yet she wielded a quiet but formidable power. For the 6th or 7th time, our laughter trailed off, leaving us in contemplative silence. Ember's smile gradually faded as her gaze drifted to the window Magnus had exited through. Seeing her expression, my own laughter vanished, replaced by a pang of longing. If I closed my eyes, I could almost feel Magnus's presence. What I felt for him wasn't exactly love, but it was something profoundly significant. What are we going to do about Dylan? Ember asked, her face set in a grimace. We can't just let him leave like this. We need to do something before he goes. Do you think we're being listened to right now? I asked, lowering my voice to keep our conversation private. I don't think so, Ember replied, shaking her head encouragingly. I was starting to trust her instincts more and more. What can we do? I frowned. We can't just kill them. We need to figure out a way to get Dylan out of his family's clutches, but what about his throne? I can't think of a perfect solution, but we can't let Dylan die, Ember said, her eyes drifting to the window as if seeking answers. It would be easier if I could talk to Magnus, I said with a grimace. I'm sure he could help. How could you talk to him? Ember asked, tilting her head. Sometimes mates with a strong bond can communicate through thoughts, I explained. I could have sworn I felt his emotions once, but it takes time to achieve full mental communication. Have you tried when you weren't so stressed out? Ember asked, her arms crossed. If you haven't noticed, I've been stressed out since my birthday gala, I pointed out, raising an eyebrow. All I'm saying is, you might get somewhere if you relaxed first, Ember suggested. We could use Magnus's help. Maybe we could even get Dylan away from his family long enough to gather some proof against them. With Lily and her daughter in the mix, that plan sounds nearly impossible, I said, my heart aching for Dylan Lancaster. It's the least impossible option we have, Ember said firmly. We need to figure out how to get you talking to Magnus. When Ember wanted something, she made sure she got it. It was clear she was born to lead. Her voice and the conviction behind it made that obvious. Just like her mother, Aura, Ember had a way of asserting herself that was impossible to ignore. Aura, I might not have the strength, but I will pick you up and toss you into this bath if I have to, Ember said with a grimace, hands on her hips as she glared at me. She'd been running the bath for the past half hour, claiming she'd put the works into it. I wasn't sure what that entailed, but I had my suspicions. Don't give me that look, Ember said, rolling her eyes. I promise there's nothing weird in that bath. Uh-huh, I said, casting a skeptical glance at the bubbling water. The fragrance rising from the water was divine, though I wasn't about to admit it to Ember. Teasing her was part of the fun, even if I appreciated her efforts. I added some bath oils, Ember continued, her tone shifting to seriousness. I found some of Magnus's old body wash and shampoo in his room. Figured it might help you unwind. A blush crept across my cheeks as I realized why the bath smelled so amazing. It was like Magnus. Oh, and you thought I wouldn't notice you sniffing the air like a bloodhound? Ember teased, a smirk playing on her lips. A bloodhound? I scoffed, snickering. My wolf's offended. Tell your wolf to stop being so stubborn, Ember said with a shrug. Then I wouldn't have to get on your case. Stop being stubborn, Aura, Kira grumbled. I'm not a bloodhound. All right, I'll get in the bath, I said with a chuckle. Good, Ember said, looking satisfied. Just try not to think about anything stressful. Focus on Magnus, not all the chaos. Easier said than done, I said, frowning. I know, Ember replied, nodding. But you've got a few days before Dylan leaves. You need to find a way to contact Magnus before then. I'll give it my best shot, I promised her. Good, Ember said, brushing a strand of curly hair from her face. I'll be outside. Thanks, Ember, I said with a grateful smile. You're the best. I know I am, Ember said with a raised eyebrow and a smile. Just remember that when you're figuring out my Christmas bonus. Christmas bonus, I said, gaping. Think happy thoughts. Ember called out with a laugh as she closed the door behind her. Once she was gone, I undressed and slipped into the bath. She was right, as usual. The water was hot against my skin, but eased the tension in my muscles. The scent, reminiscent of Magnus, was soothing, but lacking the depth of his presence. I positioned a waterproof pillow against my neck and relaxed. Think of Magnus, Kira urged. Imagine what it would be like to have him here with you. I closed my eyes and inhaled deeply, letting the scent bring Magnus to mind. I pictured him beside me, his touch gentle and comforting. His dark eyes and tousled hair, his strong arms around me, everything was perfect in my imagination. Then abruptly, the image shifted. Instead of Magnus, Mason Beaumont appeared. His arms were around me and his presence was unsettling. He whispered dark promises and manipulations. I recoiled from the thought, the water feeling suddenly cold and the image of Mason sickening. I snapped out of the bath, quickly rinsing off and drying myself. I dressed in my pajamas and emerged from the bathroom to Ember's expectant gaze. Took you long enough, Ember said, sitting up on the couch. I was only in there for 10 minutes, I said, towel drying my hair. 10 minutes? Ember scoffed. Try 2 hours. 2 hours, I exclaimed. It couldn't have been that long. Did you make any progress? Ember asked, concern evident in her tone. Once I gathered my thoughts, I replied, almost. I felt something, but then Mason Beaumont interrupted my focus. Ugh, that creep, Ember said with a scowl. Why him? I don't know, I shrugged. It could have been anyone. I'm just glad it wasn't Evander Winslow. You're right about that, Ember agreed. But watch out. Mason's the biggest snake of them all. We spent the rest of the night brainstorming ways to help Dylan. While he was here, he was safe. But once the Lancaster family returned home, he'd be vulnerable. We managed a few hours of sleep before the sun came up, and even in my dreams, Magnus's face was ever present. Ember woke with a groan, startling me. We were both sprawled on my bed, the covers still neatly in place. Is it going to be one of those days? I asked, rubbing sleep from my eyes. Vesper wants to have lunch with us. Actually, she demands it, Ember said, looking at her phone. She's been blowing up my messages. Says if we're not there in 10 minutes, she's coming up here. Definitely one of those mornings, I sighed, flopping back onto the bed. At least we have 10 minutes. I got that text 5 minutes ago, Ember grumbled. Shit, I said, jumping up from bed. We hurried to get dressed, looking like a mess in the process. Ember's curls were more unruly than usual, and I did my best to tame my own hair. We dashed out of my room, ready to face whatever Vesper had in store for us. As we turned the corner, I bumped into a hard chest, and for a brief moment my heart skipped, thinking it might be Magnus. If I closed my eyes, I could almost convince myself he hadn't left. Princess? Beta Jackson's voice was filled with surprise. I pulled away with a sigh and forced a smile at Dad's Beta. I could see the sympathy in his eyes, though he wouldn't fully understand the source of my disappointment. Your dad asked me to act as your bodyguard until a suitable replacement is found, Beta Jackson said, giving me a compassionate look. I knew he was probably thinking about my old bodyguard's failed attack. All right, I said, nodding. But you need to know Magnus wasn't behind that attack. We have to be on the same page if you're going to protect me. Whatever you've heard, I'm telling you he didn't do it. It might have been unnecessary, but I was determined to clear Magnus's name. I wanted my own people to trust my word, even if the Lancaster and Winslow families sought retribution. My people needed to stand by me. I believe you, Princess, Beta Jackson said, his tight smile betraying his concern. The power I had tried to project faltered as I looked up at him, surprised. Did Dad tell you? No, Princess, Beta Jackson shook his head. There are some things a king keeps to himself. I figured your dad would have the entire army searching for the man who nearly killed his daughter. But so far, he hasn't mobilized any forces. The other royals are criticizing him for not acting sooner. He won't stay silent for long, Ember said softly, her golden eyes fixed on me. Eventually, he'll have to take action. The other royals won't let him remain idle. It seems your dad hasn't been feeling well lately, Beta Jackson said, frowning. Your uncle says the stress is taking a toll. He could use a day off. It seems so, I agreed, frowning. Are you feeling all right? I linked with my dad. Just stressed, Aura, Dad's voice came through, sounding weary. I'll be fine soon. Ruling isn't as glamorous as it seems. You need to rest today. No work, I insisted. Aura, you know that's impossible, Dad replied with a hint of amusement. As your future Alpha Queen, I command you to take a day off, I said firmly, trying to sound authoritative despite the laughter in his voice. All right, Alpha Queen, Dad chuckled. I assume Beta Jackson arrived on time? He did, I said with a smile. Thanks for arranging this. I couldn't have chosen better myself. I ended the mind link and met Beta Jackson's gaze. Dad's taking the day off, I told him. Good, stubborn old man, Beta Jackson said with a smile, shaking his head. Don't let him hear you say that, I warned with a chuckle. I'm sure he's not averse to executing his beta. You have no idea how many times he's threatened me with that, Beta Jackson grinned. Never actually went through with it, though. We'll figure things out later. We have enough to handle right now, I said, nodding toward Ember, as Beta Jackson followed us down the hall. We reached the gazebo just in time. Vesper was already on her feet, clearly ready to hunt us down. If you two knew how hard it was to get my mom to let me come, you wouldn't have been late, Vesper huffed, flopping back into her chair. Sorry, Vesper, Ember and I mumbled as we took our seats at the small table. Two servants emerged with a rattling serving tray. Beta Jackson stood off to the side, observant but silent. His presence only made me miss Magnus more. I felt on edge without him, and Beta Jackson's role only highlighted his absence. Magnus was supposed to be by my side, my silent and brooding mate. You're going to have to apologize at least 4 more times before I'm satisfied, Vesper said with a huff, plucking a strawberry from the food cart. So, I hear your mom's been keeping you on lockdown? I asked, glancing at Ember. Oh my gosh, you wouldn't believe it, Vesper said, shaking her head. She acts like those crazy assassins were after me specifically. I tried to tell her they wanted the future Alpha Queen, but did she believe me? Of course not. Ember and I listened as Vesper vented, waiting for her to finish. She looked relieved once she had, letting out a sharp breath. Feel better? I asked, raising an eyebrow. I'll feel better when she lets me leave the house without 100 questions, Vesper said, rolling her eyes. Get yourself a bodyguard and she might worry less, I suggested, glancing at Beta Jackson. Beta Jackson wasn't nearly as subtle as Magnus, which only made my heart ache more. The mate bond was there in my mind, but accessing it was the challenge. Speaking of bodyguards, Vesper said, pursing her lips. It's a shame about Magnus. He was so delectable. I can't believe he'd do something like that. He didn't, I snapped, my teeth clenched. The mix of compliment and insult was infuriating. Magnus was mine, every bit of him. Despite Vesper's longing, that wouldn't change. He didn't. Vesper's blue eyes narrowed. Why do you say that? I hear they have tons of proof. A false confession isn't proof, I retorted, my anger flaring. Who says it's false? Vesper asked, her tone turning insincere. I know you were close, but it's clouding your judgment. What he did was terrible. My judgment isn't clouded, I snapped. The confession was coerced. Magnus didn't orchestrate anything. Someone else did. Well, who did it? Vesper pressed, her tone urgent and almost too interested. Now we sound paranoid, Kira grumbled in my mind. We're the future Alpha Queen, I argued. With at least 2 kingdoms plotting against us, a little paranoia is justified. An idea popped into my head, inspired by a movie I'd seen. The main character had told her friends different rumors to see who would spill. I saw no harm in trying something similar. Lily Lancaster, I said firmly. Lily Lancaster is responsible for the coup. Vesper's reaction to my confession was exactly what I had expected. Gossip was practically her lifeblood. What? Her jaw dropped in surprise. What makes you say that? I have my sources, I shrugged. People talk, and that's the name I keep hearing. That's insane. Vesper shook her head, clearly excited by the new tidbit. This will be the talk of the town. You can't tell anyone, I insisted, shaking my head. I don't need this information spreading. It could put Aura's life in danger, Ember added, picking up on my intention quickly. Her dad is trying to gather evidence against Lily Lancaster. Vesper's mouth formed a small O of realization, but she agreed to keep quiet. As we finished lunch, she kept pressing for more gossip, but I remained tight-lipped. Sometimes talking to Vesper was a relief. She had a way of making problems seem smaller and less daunting. Today, though, she wasn't much help. I felt a pang of guilt for testing her loyalty like that. I hoped she wouldn't spill what I'd told her, but Vesper's love for gossip was hard to ignore. After lunch, Ember and I headed back to my room. We stopped briefly in the kitchens to chat with Amara. Come over here, Amara beckoned, leading us into one of the dining rooms that was thankfully empty. She shut the door firmly and glanced around nervously. Beta Jackson stood silently behind us. Unlike Magnus, Beta Jackson's presence was almost forgettable. I missed the way Magnus's presence seemed to fill the room. Sorry about all this, Amara said with a sigh. Things are getting strange around here. Strange, I frowned. Amara and her daughter always spoke in cryptic terms which made their words hard to interpret. I wouldn't be surprised if the royals have spies on us, Amara said with a grimace. Her disdain for our guests was evident. I wouldn't doubt it, I agreed, glancing at Ember with concern. That's why I wanted to talk to you both, Amara said, her expression serious. I need you to stay with Aurelia from now on. You're in the middle of this mess, so you need to be protected. Nothing's going to happen to me, Mom, Ember protested, though she looked uneasy. Nonsense. Being close to the princess makes you a target, and now that everyone knows you're her assistant, you need protection. Amara turned to me. Is that all right with you, Aura? Of course, I said sincerely. She can stay with me as long as she needs to. Good, Amara said, her lips tightening. Now go on. I've got cleaning to do. These new arrivals are making a mess. We left the dining room and Ember and I continued to my bedroom. You can stay in my room, I said. I'll have one of Dad's men bring in a spare bed for you. You don't have to go to all that trouble, Ember protested. The couch will be fine. I'm not sure how long you'll be staying, I said firmly. We're getting you a bed, and I'll send some people to your place to collect your things. Guess there's no arguing with you, Ember said with a resigned smile. None at all, I replied. Once this is over, you'll have your own suite in the house. Ember's eyes lit up with happiness. While she was always reluctant to accept anything from me, Vesper was more than willing. Ember and her mom weren't poor, but they weren't wealthy either. I saw no harm in using my resources to help those close to me. Ember's gratitude was always evident, even if she was reluctant to show it. Will it have one of those fancy bathtubs you have? Ember asked with a grin. I really like that bathtub. Of course, I chuckled. A full walk-in closet, minibar, the works. Only the best for my assistant. Maybe I could get a plaque on my door, Ember mused. It could say Alpha Queen Aurelia Carrington's personal assistant. That's quite a mouthful, I laughed, linking my arm with hers. But we can definitely get you a plaque for your office. My office? Ember's eyes sparkled with excitement. Well, obviously, I said with a smirk. I'd never make my assistant work out of a broom closet. You need a proper office. Just as long as it's not coming out of my future Christmas bonus, Ember said with a raised eyebrow. Nope. I laughed, shaking my head. It won't come out of your Christmas bonus. As we approached my bedroom door, we ran into Evander Winslow. His presence instantly irritated me. Maybe it was because I always had to put on a facade around him. He looked as he always did, tanned and handsome, but his personality was lacking. We keep bumping into each other, Evander said with a smirk, running a hand through his sun-kissed hair. I had been actively avoiding him, and his persistent pressure was driving me mad. I had to play the part of a clueless princess around him, and it was becoming exhausting. Kira was equally frustrated. I do live here, I pointed out again, my patience wearing thin. Evander's frown deepened as he noticed my change in demeanor. Kira was pressing against my mind, clearly fed up with the charade. I swear, Kira growled, if we have to pretend to be all giggly and naive for him one more time, I'm gonna lose it. I agree, I muttered. Evander Winslow isn't our biggest issue right now. Then let's deviate from the script, Kira suggested with a sly smile. It took just 3 minutes for Evander to bring up his proposal again, his offer to replace Magnus. I struggled to keep from gagging. There was no way I would become his trophy wife while he took over my kingdom. You've been keeping me waiting, princess, Evander said with a charming smile that had undoubtedly won over many. Anyone else and I'd move on, but you are simply too irresistible. Am I? I retorted. Or is it my kingdom that's irresistible? Ember covered her snort with a well-timed cough, and I could almost feel Beta Jackson's amusement. Evander's expression shifted to one of confusion. Your kingdom is impressive, Evander said, trying to regain his composure, but it's you who truly interests me. I'm not a prize to be won, I shot back, rolling my eyes. This kingdom is mine to rule. No one, not even a mate, will take it from me. I wouldn't take anything, Evander said, shaking his head. It would be ours together. It was becoming clear that Evander Winslow struggled when he lost control. I hadn't noticed it before, but his need for dominance was becoming obvious. He seemed to crave control over everything, including the people around him. I suspected he wanted the same from his women. Total compliance. We don't bend for anyone, Kira mocked. He should have found another queen if that's what he wanted. Evander, I'm rejecting your offer, I said, keeping my tone formal and polite. I was done pretending to be something I wasn't. My life was at risk no matter what. It was time to show them that I wasn't going to sit idly by while they tried to take my kingdom. I'll wait for my true mate, someone who deserves to stand by my side. For a brief moment, Evander Winslow's carefully crafted mask slipped, revealing a hint of the monster beneath. Fear surged through me. Evander was a bigger threat than I had realized, and I knew I had just made a dangerous enemy. I was trying to help you, Evander said, his voice softening for a moment, as if he genuinely felt sympathy. I was offering you a way out, but you weren't wise enough to take it. I don't need your help, I replied firmly. I have people I trust. You don't need my help? Evander's voice took on a dark edge. Good, because when the time comes, you won't have it. He leaned in closer, and I felt Beta Jackson tense behind me. Back off, Winslow, Beta Jackson warned sharply, but Evander barely seemed to notice. With what's coming, you'll wish you had taken my offer, Evander murmured, his piercing blue eyes locking onto mine. When you've lost everything, remember my offer and how foolish you were to refuse it. Ember and I lingered in my bedroom well into the afternoon, the silence between us only broken by the arrival of the dinner cart. We spoke in hushed tones about a myriad of topics. Beta Jackson had taken over Magnus's old room, a change that left me unsettled. It troubled me how easily Magnus had been replaced, just a faceless bodyguard to everyone else. I couldn't fathom someone else filling his role. Despite my initial aversion to the idea of a bodyguard, I now wished desperately for Magnus's return. I owed him that much. Ember and I were also grappling with another issue, finding evidence against Mason Beaumont. How are we supposed to get proof when he's thousands of miles away? Ember groaned, collapsing onto my bed. I have no clue, I admitted, shaking my head. I can't just call him up and invite him for dinner. Dad would lose it. Ember fell silent for a moment. Then her golden eyes gleamed with a hint of mischief as she bit her lip. Well, you might just be able to. I frowned. Dad would definitely kill me. Besides, Mason Beaumont would likely be suspicious. I'm not so sure, Ember said with a shrug. Sure, he'd be suspicious. Have you seen the guy? He thrives on drama, but he wouldn't be able to refuse. I only met the family once, but he seems to enjoy being in the center of it all. Okay, so let's say I invite him over for dinner. How would I even contact him? I grimaced. I doubt Dad has his number just lying around. You'll need to go through someone who's working with him, Ember said reluctantly. Lily, I groaned as the realization dawned on me. I'd have to ask the last person I wanted to help me, just what I needed. Do we have to? I whined, pinching the bridge of my nose as a headache began to form. A headache named Lily Lancaster, Kira grumbled in my head. Come with me? I asked, trying to keep my tone light as Ember's eyebrow raised in surprise. Like I'd let you handle this alone, Ember scoffed. That woman would have you tangled up in her web in no time. We made our way to the other wing of the mansion, where Dad had housed the royals, ensuring their quarters were far from mine. Beta Jackson trailed behind us the entire way. I stopped halfway down the hall and turned to face him. You have to let us go in alone, I insisted, knowing his response. No chance, Princess, Beta Jackson replied, shaking his head with a furrowed brow. Look, I wouldn't ask if it weren't important, I said firmly. Wait just outside the door. I'll mind-link you if there's any trouble. Don't let your dad hear about this, Aurelia, Beta Jackson warned. This is risky, even for you. I know, I nodded. But they won't harm me in my own home. I'm sure of it. You place too much trust in these royals, Beta Jackson said, shaking his head. They're capable of more than you think. I'm sure they are, I agreed. But this needs to be done privately. The fewer people know, the better. Princess? Beta Jackson's voice was filled with concern. Yes, Beta Jackson? I turned to meet his worried gaze. Just to clear an old man's head, you're not planning anything unbecoming with the Lancaster family, are you? The question clearly made him uncomfortable, but his concern was genuine. I wanted to be upset, but I understood his worry. He had watched me grow up, and to him, I was still a little girl. I would never, I assured him. I only work with those I trust. Thank you, Princess, Beta Jackson said, visibly relieved. I knocked on the double suite door a few times and waited for the shuffling inside to stop. Beta Jackson's unease was palpable as he stood behind us. Dylan's father opened the door. He was a large man with fiery hair, much friendlier in demeanor than his children. I wondered if Dylan would look the same were it not for the constant threat of danger. Princess Aurelia? Dylan's dad greeted, his grin warm. Hello, Mr. Lancaster, I said, smiling politely. I realized I had never actually spoken to him before. Call me Aiden, Princess, Aiden Lancaster said, shaking my hand gently. I'm here to speak with Lily, if you don't mind, I said, observing the confusion in his eyes. Lily? Aiden asked, puzzled. At that moment, Lily Lancaster appeared, dressed in a knee-length dress that hugged her curves. Oh dear, you're late, Lily said, her disapproval evident. You were expecting the princess? Aiden asked, raising an eyebrow. It seemed Aiden Lancaster was more perceptive than Lily gave him credit for. Perhaps he was aware of what was truly going on. Of course, Lily said, dismissing her husband with a wave. I invited her over for tea yesterday, but she had to reschedule. Don't worry, Princess. The tea hasn't been started yet. Thank you, Lily, I said, my smile tight as I tried to mask my irritation at her deceit. I apologize for the delay. I've been making some changes to my bedroom. I refrained from mentioning that the changes were due to Ember staying with me from now on. I didn't think Lily needed to know that detail. You must tell me all about it, Lily said with a dazzling smile that took me by surprise. She was enchanting when she smiled, hiding her true nature. I'm quite the interior designer, you know. You should visit our kingdom sometime. We have countless antiques. Lily led me away from her husband and into one of the many rooms in their suite. The Lancaster suite was essentially a large apartment with a huge living room, 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and a private lounge. Lily took us to the lounge, where her friendly facade disappeared the moment she closed the door. What brings you here, Princess? Lily asked, her eyebrow raised. You couldn't have come all this way just for tea. Lily ignored Ember entirely, casting a glance of pure distaste in her direction before focusing solely on me. Her treatment of Ember angered me. It was clear she viewed Ember as beneath her, whether because of her humanity or her lack of royal status. Clearly, I said with a dry smile, shifting uncomfortably in my seat. The lounge was bathed in soft white and cream hues, with fading light streaming through the windows to create a relaxed atmosphere. But relaxation was the last thing I felt. It was as if I was trying to handle a venomous snake without getting bitten. Then tell me, Princess, Lily Lancaster said with a smirk, settling herself in the center of the silk sofa. "What can I do for you?" "Might as well get straight to the point," Kira muttered, her irritation clear. "We don't need to be here any longer than necessary." "I need a way to contact Mason Beaumont," I said, pursing my lips as I searched Lily's face for a reaction. Her expression remained neutral, but I saw a flicker of interest. "Mason Beaumont," Lily repeated thoughtfully, tapping her chin. "And what do you think your father would say if he knew you were trying to contact him?" "I think it's clear enough that I'm the future Alpha Queen," I replied, my tone firm. "I have to do what I believe is best." "And so you do," Lily said with a smile. "But why do you think I would have a way to contact him? We're hardly friends if you haven't noticed." "Let's drop the pretense," I said, feeling my frustration rise. "I know you have a way to reach him. You're too resourceful not to." "It seems you're more perceptive than I gave you credit for," Lily admitted, nodding with an air of appreciation. "Fine, but I want something in return." "Knew it," Kira grumbled in my mind. "Depends on what you want," I said through clenched teeth, struggling to keep my irritation in check. "I'm guessing you're not asking just for fun," Lily said with a knowing smile. "You need to contact him for a reason." "That's correct," I said, forcing the words out. "Just see what she wants," Kira advised, trying to keep me calm. I relaxed my jaw, trying to suppress my irritation. I needed to appear grateful, not angry. "My favor is simple," Lily said. "When you do get in touch with Mason Beaumont, just hear him out." "Hear him out?" I frowned, surprised. "That's all?" It was the last thing I expected. Ember stiffened beside me, her golden eyes fixed on Lily, even though she was ignored. "That's it," Lily said with a laugh. "I'm not asking you to do anything distasteful. Just listen to what he has to say, consider your options, and think about the future of your kingdom." "I will listen," I promised, "but I make no promises about what I'll do afterward." "I understand," Lily said, taking a sip from her coffee cup. "Keep an open mind, though." "I will," I nodded. Lily walked over to a desk and retrieved a piece of paper from a drawer, scribbling a number on it. She handed it to me, and I studied her elegant handwriting. "Memorize the number and then burn the paper," Lily instructed as she resumed her seat on the couch. "Mason Beaumont values his privacy. This is his personal number." "Thank you, Lily," I said, offering a polite smile as I took the number. I couldn't help but wonder what had shaped her into this person. No one was born with a natural inclination for betrayal or deceit. What had happened in her life to turn her into this? "No," Lily said, shaking her head with a smile. "Thank you, Princess." Ember and I headed back to my bedroom while Beta Jackson returned to his post. "That woman is very skilled at keeping her emotions in check," Ember said with a nod of begrudging respect, though her expression was sour. "Unfortunately, I still need some practice," I said with a grimace. "That'll come with time," Ember shrugged. "Now, let's get this done." I pulled out my cell phone and dialed the number Lily had given me, repeating it until it was imprinted in my mind. Once I was certain I had it memorized, I handed the note to Ember. She tossed it into the fireplace, watching as the flames consumed it. The phone rang once, twice, and then a smooth, slightly rough voice answered. And who might this be? Mason Beaumont's voice was a blend of silk and grit. I opened my mouth, but the words caught in my throat. After a moment of clearing my throat, I managed to speak. "This is Princess Aurelia Carrington," I said, striving to keep my voice steady. He needed to know I wasn't intimidated, even though I wasn't entirely at ease. "Princess Aurelia Carrington," Mason chuckled, his voice reminding me faintly of Magnus. "To what do I owe this pleasure?" "I wanted to invite you to dinner," I said abruptly, realizing I hadn't planned what to say. Mason didn't seem surprised or reluctant. He was simply amused, which I found slightly irritating. "Are you plotting my demise, sweet princess?" Mason chuckled. "Of course not," I retorted, sounding more like myself. "It's bad manners to murder a guest." Then it seems most have terrible manners." Mason's laughter was almost musical. "It's just dinner," I said, struggling to find the right words. "We didn't have much chance to talk at the gala. I thought we might try again, under less strained circumstances." "It seemed you had made up your mind when we last spoke," Mason mused. "Has your decision changed, little princess?" "No, it hasn't," I said, shaking my head. I felt the need to add something. "But I could be swayed." Such tempting bait you've thrown." Mason chuckled darkly. "What would your father think?" "It will only be one evening," I said, grimacing. "My father will manage his displeasure." Mason's voice glided over me like silk. "Name the time and date, little princess." 3 days from now at 6 in the evening, I said, calculating in my head. The other royals would be leaving the next morning. As unappealing as it sounded, I wanted all our adversaries gathered in one place. It made it easier to keep an eye on them. "I look forward to seeing you again, little princess." Mason's voice was like a caress. "Perhaps I can persuade you to join my side." "You have to tell your dad," Ember said with a grimace as we sat on my bed. "I don't want to," I responded, shaking my head stubbornly, though deep down I knew it was inevitable. Ember rolled her eyes. "You knew this was coming. You can't back out now." "I'm about to inform the Alpha King that a man he despises is coming to dinner tomorrow," I said, pursing my lips. "He's definitely not going to like it." "But you're not just anyone. You're his daughter," Ember replied, frowning. "Just be honest with him." "You're right," I admitted reluctantly. "Let's get this over with." "Dad," I called through the mind link. "Hey, Aura," came his immediate response. His voice sounded more relaxed, like he was in a better mood. "How are you feeling?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Much better," Dad chuckled. "I could get used to this time off." "I think you deserve it," I replied. "Mind if I drop by?" "Not at all," he said warmly. "I'm in my suite and have Beta Jackson with me." "I'll be there in 5, I said, trying to keep my tone light, even though I was a bundle of nerves. When the mind link ended, I grimaced. I was about to ruin his mood and interrupt his rare day off. Was this really the right move? "You and Ember were right," Kira, my wolf, chimed in. "You can't get answers without confronting it head-on." Ember, Beta Jackson, and I headed to my dad's suite. After a brief knock, I opened the door at his signal to enter. "You're coming in with me?" I whispered to Ember. "No way," she hissed, shaking her head. "Too late," I smirked, grabbing her hand and pulling her into the room. She jabbed her elbow into my side, making me wince as Dad gave us a suspicious look. He was looking much better, the dark circles under his eyes almost gone, and a healthy glow returning to his face. It eased the tension in my stomach. "What's going on?" Dad asked, one eyebrow raised as his face turned serious. "Nothing happened," I stammered, shaking my head. "But there's something I need to tell you." "All right," he said slowly, sinking into his chair, giving me his full attention. "Go on." I took a deep breath. "You remember how Ember mentioned one of the shooters brought up Mason Beaumont?" "I remember," Dad nodded, waiting for me to continue. "Well, I need proof," I said, pressing my lips together. "And I can't get it while he's holed up in his kingdom." Dad's expression darkened, and he pinched the bridge of his nose. "You didn't." "It's just for dinner," I rushed, trying to get the words out before he could stop me. "Just a couple of hours. We'll survive it." "Dinner?" Dad shook his head in disbelief. "Aura, even if the Beaumonts were behind the attack, why would you invite him here?" "Because we need proof," I insisted. "We have a better chance of getting answers with him right in front of us." "Is the whole family coming?" Dad asked, scowling. "No." I shook my head. "Just Mason." "And when is this dinner?" Dad sighed, clearly resigned. 3 days from now, 6 o'clock, I confirmed. "That gives us tonight and tomorrow to plan." "Fine," Dad nodded, though his tone was tight. "I'll trust your judgment on this, Aura. But next time, consult me before making decisions like this." "I'm sorry," I said softly, feeling the sting of his disappointment. It was a spur-of-the-moment decision. "I get it," he said, sighing. "You're going to be in charge soon, and I won't always be able to guide you. Just remember, sometimes it's wise to listen to others, especially those with more experience." "I will, Dad. I promise," I nodded. After a tight hug, Ember and I made our way back to my bedroom. "You need to talk to Magnus again," Ember said the moment we were inside. "I know," I sighed, hoping things would go better this time. With everything going on, the last thing I needed was another unsettling encounter with Mason Beaumont. "Can you show me what you put in the bath last time?" I grinned cheekily at Ember, who chuckled and rolled her eyes at me. Once everything was ready, I stripped off my clothes and sank into the warm water. I carefully adjusted the pillow behind my head, focusing on letting go of the stress that had been weighing me down. This time, it was a bit easier. My mind drifted peacefully as the hot water worked its magic, easing the tension in my body. Without effort, Magnus's face appeared in my thoughts. His messy, chocolate-brown hair, those deep obsidian eyes, and the full lips I'd only been lucky enough to feel twice. I remembered how his kiss felt against mine, how the emotion behind it seemed to touch my very soul. I could almost hear the mate bond snapping into place, like a cord between us that I could feel, stretching out like a shining white thread that could span worlds if it had to. Magnus, I reached out tentatively through the bond. I let myself remember the first time our skin touched, the electric sparks dancing across my body. Aura? His voice was soft, but the sound sent a shiver of pleasure through me. Is that you? I lingered on the sound of his voice, rough and husky, yet laced with so much emotion. Slowly, it grew louder in my mind. A hazy image began to form. It was like watching an old, static-filled TV, the picture fuzzy and distorted. I could see a damp alleyway, my eyes cast down towards my feet. The lifeless body of a man lay crumpled on the ground, blood staining my hands. It took a moment before I realized I was seeing what Magnus was seeing. It's me. I'm here, I whispered through the bond, a smile tugging at my lips as his voice filled my head. I wanted to connect sooner, but I've been busy. His voice carried a note of guilt. The scene shifted as he turned his gaze away from the body, clearly not wanting me to see it. What happened? I asked softly. Who is he? I kept my voice calm, hoping to show him I trusted him. I knew Magnus wouldn't kill someone unless he had to. Black market dealer, Magnus grunted. Your uncle. He sold the necklace. It's in the hands of someone pretty powerful now. Hearing that sent a wave of horror crashing over me, threatening to break the connection. My thoughts darted to Uncle Orion, but I forced myself to stay focused. There were things I needed to say to Magnus. Where is it going? I asked, swallowing the emotions building inside me. To the Beaumont Kingdom, Magnus replied, his voice tight with anger. I could feel the depth of his hatred for the Beaumont family burning like a constant fire in his chest, stoked by memories he kept locked away. Why would it go there? I muttered under my breath. It's being sold to someone high up, he grumbled. You can guess who. Mason. The name slipped from my thoughts before I could stop it. The swirling storm of emotions hit me again. My uncle had sold the necklace. It might have been a fake, but that didn't matter. He'd promised to keep it safe for me, and now it was headed straight into the hands of the Beaumonts. Magnus, I called out, wincing as the connection wavered. A dull ache began to throb in my head, and I knew I was reaching my limit. Can you hear me? I called out again, panic rising as the image in my mind went dark. I can hear you, little princess. His voice came through, sending warmth fluttering through my chest. You're exhausted. You should rest. I can't, I said, shaking my head even though he couldn't see me. There's one more thing I need to ask, and I hate that I have to. Never apologize, little princess, Magnus replied softly. I'd do anything for you. I missed the way his accent wrapped around his words, rough, deep, and impossibly sexy. I need you to come back to the house tomorrow night without being detected, I said, grimacing at the request. We need to get Dylan Lancaster out, no matter the cost. His family leaves in 3 days, and after that, Dylan will be dead. I'll try, little princess, Magnus agreed. Where should we meet? I can't leave the house, but if you make it to my bedroom window, I'll let you in, I said. We were rushing now, our words spilling out as fast as we could say them, desperate to hear each other's voice. Divert some of the guards near your side of the house, Magnus grunted. That'll help. I'll see you tomorrow, little princess. Tomorrow, I breathed, committing the sound of his voice to memory. Midnight. Midnight, he repeated before the connection finally broke. We spent what felt like hours on the balcony, taking our time to relax. Vesper seemed to need a break from her mom, and I was happy to give her that. It felt like old times, talking, laughing, and forgetting all the drama for a while. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that Vesper was slipping away from us. I hated that thought, wished I could ignore it, but it lingered. We had been inseparable since birth, and the idea of growing apart was something I never imagined. After a couple of hours, Vesper stood up from the table. Her phone had been buzzing nonstop, her mom trying to reach her, even though Vesper had said she was with me. I still have to convince her to let me leave tomorrow, Vesper sighed. But don't worry, I'll be here tomorrow night. I hope your mom chills out a bit, I added, trying to make her feel better. Honestly, I'd trade anything, even dealing with an overprotective parent, if it meant my mom could come back. Once Vesper left, it was just Ember and me. We still need to tell your dad, Ember reminded me, a worried frown creasing her face. The day was getting late and we were running out of time. Our plan hinged on my dad providing a distraction. Dad? I reached out through the mind link. Are you still busy? What's up, Aura? Dad's voice came back right away, sounding much better than he had in the past few days. I'd nearly forgotten he'd been sick. I need to talk to you, I said, alone, preferably. Dad picked up on the seriousness in my voice and responded quickly. I'm in my office. Come by. I had to send your uncle on an errand. Be there in 5, I finished, ending the mind link and getting up from my chair. Beta Jackson stood outside my dad's office as Ember and I approached, ready to explain our plan. So, I've made plans with Dylan Lancaster, I began casually, trying not to let my growing anxiety show. The thought of Uncle Orion and the danger he posed made my skin crawl. You have? Dad raised an eyebrow, then silently slid a pen and paper toward me. He mouthed the word right and gestured for me to do so. Is someone listening? I asked quietly. I don't think so, Dad replied, though his smile was cautious. But you can never be too careful. It was almost ironic how my dad was more paranoid than me, even though I knew for sure his brother was a traitor. How Uncle Orion had managed to stay under the radar for so long baffled me. I took the pen and kept my message short and direct. We're faking Dylan's death. His dad is in on it. We need you to distract Lily and Daisy. Bring them to your office while I handle the rest. Dad read the note, his eyebrows rising in surprise. Will this work? He asked, his voice low and serious. It will, I nodded, feeling more confident than before. I couldn't afford to let doubt get in the way. Doubt was like a disease that spread and ruined everything in its path. I wouldn't let it sabotage our plan. By tonight, Dylan would be safe. Then I'll do my part, Dad agreed, a proud look in his eyes as he glanced at me. There's one more thing, I added, giving Dad a smile before writing my last bit of information. Magnus is coming tonight. He'll take Dylan away. I need you to get the guards to leave their posts for an hour to avoid suspicion. Dad read over the message carefully. That's risky, he said quietly. If he's caught, I won't be able to protect him. He won't be caught, I replied with conviction. Even if I had my doubts about the plan, I had none about Magnus. He would get away safely, I was certain of it. Dad scanned the message one more time before tossing the paper into the fire, where it quickly turned to ash. Aura, Dad called, as Ember and I were about to leave. I have a question of my own, if you don't mind. His eyes had that distant look again, like he was thinking about the past, about Mom. What is it? I asked, frowning as I recognized that look. Anytime Dad thought of Mom, his eyes would glaze over, remembering their life together. Do you plan on letting Magnus rule by your side? Dad asked, his voice soft but serious. There's a lot you don't know about him. I paused, genuinely considering the question. The answer came easily. Magnus had earned my trust, whether he realized it or not. Then I'll let him tell me what I don't know, I said, resolute. But yes, Dad, Magnus will rule beside me. Ember and I returned to my bedroom, where we'd been spending way too much time lately. I promised myself that once everything was over, I'd take her to the mall. It wasn't much, but I wanted to show her my appreciation. Naming her my assistant didn't seem like enough of a reward. It felt like a formality. Ember had always been by my side, more than just an assistant in truth. I really hope Vesper doesn't sneak out tomorrow night. Ember shook her head. Her mom's gonna lose it. She's going to freak out either way, I replied, shaking my head. True, Ember agreed, flashing me a knowing look. Now, go talk to Magnus already. I can tell you're dying to. I blushed, unable to deny it. Magnus had been on my mind all day, and I was eager for our next conversation. I'll be back soon, I said with a sheepish grin. Take your time, Ember teased. I could use a nap. Rolling my eyes at my tired friend, I slipped into the bathroom. I went through the same routine as Ember, adding some bath oil to the water and inhaling deeply, trying to capture Magnus's earthy scent. The body wash Ember had taken from his room helped. It reminded me of that night I snuck into his room. We should have jumped him then and there, Kira grumbled in my head, pining for our mate. You're not wrong, I sighed, stripping out of my clothes. It was easier to push those thoughts away when Magnus wasn't around. But as I sank into the bath, closing my eyes, I couldn't help but recall how his hands felt on my skin, how his breath had fanned across my face, and how his mouth had moved over mine. I was so lost in those memories that I didn't realize the connection between us was forming again. Aura, Magnus's deep voice growled in my mind, startling me out of my thoughts. Now is not the best time for those kinds of thoughts. His emotions flowed through me, raw and untamed. His desire was overwhelming, unlike anything he'd felt before. His need for me was almost unbearable. Sorry, I apologized with a sheepish smile. I can't help it. Calm your mind. Magnus grunted, though I could feel his struggle as his wolf clawed at his restraint. His thoughts slipped into mine, and I could sense what he wanted, to climb through my window early, to touch me, to make me scream his name. He wanted to see the bliss on my face as he claimed me. I stifled my own desires, knowing that tonight was too important to risk anything. Magnus and Dylan's lives depended on it. Everything's set for tonight, I told Magnus, pushing aside my own feelings and focusing on the task at hand. Have you learned anything more about my necklace? Someone from inside the Beaumont kingdom mentioned that the necklace was sold directly to Mason Beaumont, Magnus growled, his voice thick with barely contained rage. Why do you hate them so much? I asked softly, trying to soothe him through our bond. He could sense my emotions and the effort I was making to calm him. I'll tell you when we meet in person, Magnus replied, his accent more pronounced, but I won't do it over the bond. I'll be waiting, I said with a gentle smile. I'm certain my uncle is the one who sold the necklace. Maybe there's been a mistake, Magnus said, his frown deepening. I could tell he said this to spare me from the full weight of the truth. He didn't want me to be hurt by the revelation of my uncle's betrayal. There was no escaping the truth, though. I had enough to distract me from dwelling on it, but I knew the reality would hit sooner or later. For now, I was determined to keep the peace. I don't think there's been a mistake, I said, shaking my head. We both know what's really going on. I'm truly sorry, little princess, Magnus said, his concern genuine. He wasn't just worried about himself. He cared deeply about how I felt. Despite his general disdain for humans and werewolves, he had a genuine concern for me. I'm glad to know, I said, trying to sound strong. It means I can stop him before anyone else gets hurt. The necklace has left the Beaumont kingdom, Magnus murmured. I'm tracking it, but it's been difficult. I'm not sure where it's headed. If it's on Mason Beaumont, I'm afraid it's heading straight to my house, I said with a grimace. I hadn't told Magnus about my dinner plans with Mason. Why would he be coming to your kingdom? Magnus's voice darkened, a hint of malice creeping in. I invited him for dinner, I said, cringing slightly but maintaining my composure. I didn't want to upset Magnus, but I needed proof to clear his name. You're having dinner with him? Magnus's voice deepened, his aura thick with possessive jealousy. I could almost feel him drowning in his own emotions. I won't be alone, I reassured him. My dad will be there, and my uncle too, most likely. I need to find proof against Mason. Magnus could sense my exhaustion and frustration with the situation. I longed for him to be by my side, feeling incomplete without him. He was meant to rule alongside me, to be the one I spent my life with. I sensed Magnus's surprise at my thoughts. He seemed to have feared that I might reject him. Although he struggled with his own desire to claim me, he was slowly accepting that I might actually want him by my side. Keep an eye on Mason, Magnus advised. He won't harm you in your home, but he can still cause trouble. I will, I promised, determined to keep my word. I'll see you tonight, little princess, Magnus said softly. We have much to discuss. Once our connection ended, I opened my eyes to find the bathwater had grown cold, a sign I had been in there for hours. My headache was less severe this time. I was getting better at reaching out to Magnus, though I wished it weren't necessary. Magnus should be here with me. When I stepped out of the bathroom, Ember was sitting upright on the couch, her arms stretched overhead as she yawned. Glad one of us managed to nap, I said, rubbing my temples. At least one of us will be useful, Ember smirked as she stood up. Very funny, I replied, rolling my eyes. It was late afternoon now, with the sun dipping behind the trees, casting a warm orange glow over the garden. An hour later, Minda knocked on the door with the dinner cart. Dining in the formal room had become rare lately, and I wasn't sure I could handle a meal with Lily, Daisy, and Evander there. Eating in my room with Ember was the safer choice. Princess? Minda's voice was cautious, her concern evident. What's wrong, Mimi? I asked, noting the worry in her eyes. I just wanted to ask you something, Mimi said, fidgeting with her nails. Go ahead, I said, trying to put her at ease. Well, Mimi hesitated. I heard from another servant that Lily Lancaster tried to kill you. I called it. Kira's voice chimed in my head. I think we all did, I responded. I was just trying to stay optimistic. Typical of Vesper to spread rumors, Kira said with a hint of irritation. Regardless, I want an explanation, I said firmly. Let's find out, Kira suggested. She's staying over tomorrow, after all. You're right, I agreed. I couldn't help but scoff at Vesper's betrayal. I'd told her my safety could be at risk if she spread rumors, yet she'd done it anyway. While I didn't believe Vesper was involved with Mason or Lily, her lack of discretion annoyed me. I decided to forgive her for now, hoping for an explanation, but I wouldn't be trusting her with any secrets in the near future. I relayed my conversation with Magnus to Ember, leaving out the more personal details. There were things Ember didn't need to know. After dinner, I sprawled out on my bed, trying to force sleep to come. At some point, I must have drifted off. When I opened my eyes, the sun had set and the night was darker than usual. The stars and moon seemed to have dimmed. Ember was sitting on the couch, her eyes fixed on me in the dim light. Have you been watching me sleep? I groaned as I sat up, eyeing her warily. You talk in your sleep, Ember said matter-of-factly. And you thought you'd just listen? I raised an eyebrow. Ember shrugged. Nothing better to do. I could name a few things, I smirked. Time dragged on. My nerves frayed as I waited. I couldn't sit still, pacing the room with my thoughts racing. A soft tapping on the window made my heart leap. A sharp tap on the window made my heart leap violently. I whispered urgently through our mental link. Dad, are the guards on my side of the house distracted? We're in the middle of a meeting right now, Dad replied quickly, his voice tinged with stress. It was a challenge to come up with a reason for this meeting right before midnight. Did you figure something out? I asked, my anxiety mounting. Of course, Dad answered, his tone reassuring. Make the most of your time, Aura. I'm not sure when Magnus's name will be cleared. Thanks, Dad, I said, already hurrying to the window. Anything for you, Aura. Dad's voice softened with affection before the link ended. I threw open the window with a frantic urgency, peering into the darkness. The outside lights were a mix of on and off, thanks to either Magnus or Dad, I assumed. A dark figure moved beneath the window. Fear surged through me, making me pull back instinctively. Magnus slipped through the window, his face illuminated by the soft bedroom light. I was so stunned that I forgot to close the window. I heard Ember move from the couch and quickly shut and locked it behind us. Magnus and I stood, locked in a gaze. He looked the same. Dark hair slightly longer on top, but still shaved short on the sides and back. His hair was tousled from the wind, his pale skin flushed from running. He loomed over me, a towering and imposing figure. Yet, I felt no fear. Every part of me felt complete, as if he had never left. His obsidian eyes roamed my face with awe, and I returned his stare. His lips were full and inviting, his jawline sharp with a hint of stubble. I think I'll head into the room across the hall, Ember said, her golden eyes flicking between us. Give you two some time. No, I said firmly, my eyes still locked on Magnus. It's not safe. I'll be fine, Ember said, her voice steady. I'll only be 10 feet away. I didn't hear her leave. I was entirely consumed by Magnus, my mate. As soon as the door shut, Magnus moved swiftly. My chest collided with his as his powerful arms enveloped me. His scent, musky, earthy, with a hint of spice, invaded my senses, igniting a fire deep inside me. His lips crashed against mine, his large hands gripping my face with intense passion. The sweetness of his touch was overwhelming, making my skin sizzle. Aurelia, his voice, thick with accent, made my name sound like a spell. We need to talk. Talking was the last thing I wanted. I had done nothing but talk since Magnus left. All I craved was to lose myself in his touch, to feel his skin against mine. The electric sparks between us were instant, spreading from my face to my arms. "We can talk later," I murmured against his lips, clinging desperately to him. I could feel his hard chest pressing against mine. The fabric of his clothes irritated me. I wanted them gone. "Aura," Magnus's voice was low, his grip on my face firm. "No, Magnus," I insisted, shaking my head as I pressed my lips to his. His lips responded with equal fervor, merging with mine in a heated kiss. "I don't want to talk. I want you, every part of you." A deep, primal growl rumbled from Magnus's throat, vibrating against my lips. His hands slid down my torso to my hips, gripping them tightly. He lifted me effortlessly, wrapping my legs around his waist. I didn't resist as I was gently laid back on the bed, Magnus looming over me. In that moment, I knew without a doubt that I couldn't imagine my life without Magnus. Even though I didn't know everything about him, I trusted him completely. I wanted him by my side in my future. "I love you," I whispered, the words spilling out with an urgency I couldn't control. Kira's voice mingled with mine, both of us declaring the same deep affection. Magnus's eyes flew open, his gaze burning into mine with a fierce intensity. "I want you to mark me, Magnus," I breathed, my voice thick with desire. I was certain of my feelings, of my need for him. A mark was a bond, a declaration of our connection. I wanted that with him, wanted him to claim me completely. Magnus's hesitation was evident. He seemed to fear that I might retract my words, that I was speaking out of momentary passion. "I mean it, Magnus," I said firmly, cupping his face with my hands. "I love you. I want this." A rough snarl escaped him, his control breaking. His lips parted in a growl that would be etched in my memory. His dark eyes locked onto mine until I collapsed, breathless, against his chest. "I still love you," I murmured, pressing my lips to his. The weight of my decision crashed down on me like a ton of bricks once Magnus and I were done. I had complicated our plans further, but I couldn't bring myself to regret it. Magnus and I were mates. Why wouldn't I complete the process with him? I refused to let Uncle Orion, Mason Beaumont, or anyone else scare me away from being with my mate. The truth would come out sooner or later. Those who were familiar with my scent would know I had completed the mating process. Only those who knew Magnus's scent would realize who my mate was. "Little princess," Magnus said, his dark eyes fixed intently on my face. I snapped back to reality, realizing I had been lost in thought as I dressed. The bond between Magnus and me had intensified. While I couldn't read his thoughts or see his memories, I could feel his emotions more acutely than before. Magnus was anxious, worried that I might regret my decision. Despite his attempts to maintain control, he ultimately gave in to his deepest desires and instincts, marking me as his own. "I don't regret anything," I said firmly, stepping into his chest and inhaling deeply. He smelled the same as ever, musky with a hint of something spicy, but now there was an additional sweetness, like vanilla and cinnamon. The blend was unexpectedly delightful. Magnus wrapped one arm around my back and tangled his fingers in my hair, lifting my head to meet his gaze. Each kiss from him was better than the last, and I could easily imagine waking up every day with him on my mind. His lips were surprisingly gentle, as if he feared I might shatter under his touch. "I think we're running out of time," I said with a humorless chuckle. I wanted to stay in this room forever, away from the world outside. I wanted time with Magnus to explore every part of his soul and body, to build a life together where we ruled the kingdom side by side. Just then, Ember's light knock came at the door. Instead of calling out, I crept across the room and cracked the door open. Ember slipped inside, her eyes wide with urgency. "He has to leave now if we want to get Dylan out in time," Ember said in a hushed tone, her gaze flicking to the mark on my neck. It was already starting to heal, revealing traces of the beautiful mark underneath. Her eyes darted between Magnus, me, and the disheveled bed. Before I could say anything, Magnus pulled me into his arms. His lips crashed onto mine, silencing any words I might have uttered. Without another word, Magnus opened the far window and slipped out. This was the second time he had left me through that window. "You couldn't resist, huh?" Ember raised an eyebrow, closing the window as I struggled with my emotions. She was more accurate than she knew. It was nearly impossible to resist once Magnus had been in my arms. The risk was worth the reward. "No, I couldn't," I admitted, walking over to a mirror. I looked at the mark on my shoulder, a smile playing on my lips. The wound where Magnus had bitten me was still raw and raised, but a deep blue mark was beginning to form, reminding me of what Magnus's room had looked like before he left. "I'd cover that up for now," Ember said, her eyebrows knitted in concern. She wasn't judging, just curious. Kira growled in my head, disapproving of hiding the mark from my mate. I slipped a different t-shirt over my head, one with a high neckline that just covered the mark. My smile faded as the shirt concealed Magnus's mark. "What's it like?" Ember asked, frowning as we lay quietly on the bed. It had only been 5 minutes, but it felt like hours. We needed to stay hidden until the plan was set in motion. Lily would become suspicious if we were wandering the halls while her son faced his fate. I pondered Ember's question, wondering if anything could truly describe the mate bond. Werewolves could mate with humans, though it was rare. "It's like finding the other half of your soul," I said slowly. "You never realize it's missing until you meet them." Ember seemed satisfied with my answer, and we waited in silence until a rapid knock sounded on the door. Our eyes locked, signaling that the plan was either successful or that Magnus had been caught. We crept from the bed, even though all I wanted was to run. I lowered my gaze, as if just waking from sleep. Lily Lancaster stood at the door, wrapped in a floor-length robe. Her eyes were narrow and calculating as she looked at me. I relaxed my body and stared back, keeping my jaw slack. "Princess, would you mind if I came in?" Lily's voice was friendly but edged with ice. "I guess," I mumbled, stepping back from the doorway. I glanced at Ember, who was just sitting up from the couch, her expression tired and slightly dazed. "I know you're close with my son," Lily said, raising an eyebrow. "Close?" I yawned. "Dylan's just a friendly face." Lily's lips pressed into a tight line as her eyes scanned my face. Her gaze shifted to Ember before returning to me. "Dylan killed himself tonight," Lily said abruptly, her face contorting with feigned heartbreak. She was either incredibly perceptive or she believed Ember and me. I felt my throat tighten, my jaw slack. I fought back tears, knowing they would attract unwanted attention. Instead, I let my eyes fill with shock and dismay. I could have pretended to mourn for her son, but she would see through that immediately. We both knew she wanted Dylan out of the way. After my initial shock faded, I allowed suspicion to take over. "I thought you should know," Lily said, forcing a tight-lipped smile. "It seems he couldn't handle this life. There will be an investigation into his death," I said firmly, meeting her gaze. A flicker of surprise crossed her face. She had been raised on lies and suspicion, so she was accustomed to it. "There's no need for that," Lily said dismissively. "He left a note. It's in his handwriting, if you'd like to check." "How did he die, Lily?" I asked, feigning surprise. "Poor boy jumped from the window," Lily said with a shake of her head, distaste evident in her eyes. I wasn't surprised that Lily didn't detect the change in my scent when she entered my bedroom. Magnus's presence had lingered in the room ever since he left. The scent of him had started to fade, though, especially as I used his body wash in my baths. Dad had summoned everyone to the living room, Ember and I included. The entire royal family was there, along with Uncle Orion, Dad, Ember, and me. Evander Winslow gave me a hard yet faintly sympathetic look. Aiden Lancaster appeared haunted, like a father mourning his only son. Lily played the grieving mother role flawlessly, hiding her true feelings from Dad. Even Daisy Lancaster wore a mask of sadness, though it was far less convincing than her mother's. My heart pounded in my chest. I stood off to the side with Ember, hoping my scent wouldn't be too noticeable amidst the multitude of other smells. There were already so many scents in the room. Hopefully, mine would be masked for now. I wasn't afraid of the world knowing about Magnus and me, but this wasn't the right moment to reveal our bond. I needed to clear his name first. Zane stood to the side, his lips pressed into a tight line. He was unaware of the entire setup, looking mournful for the prince he had never truly known. "Dylan was clearly troubled," Lily said, shaking her head as she dabbed at her eyes with a cloth. "We never expected this." "You say he jumped from the window?" Dad's dark eyebrow lifted at Aiden Lancaster. Aiden, tormented yet composed, played his part well. "I saw it," he said, his voice thick with grief. "I arrived just a minute too late." "You mustn't blame yourself," Lily said, shaking her head at Aiden. I saw his body too. I arrived shortly after. I can vouch for it as well, Beta Jackson said, clearing his throat. I was in the kitchen when I saw him fall past the window. Beta Jackson shot me a subtle look that no one else seemed to notice. I'll attend to my son's body, Aiden Lancaster said, giving Lily a long look. If you would excuse me, Alpha King. Of course, Aiden, Dad said, frowning. If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask. Aiden, Lily, and Daisy left the room. Dad turned to us, his loss evident. He was adept at masking his emotions for the public, better than I had expected. While I know sleep will not come easily, rest is important, Dad said, frowning. You all may return to your quarters. Except for you, Aura. I'd like a word with you. Ember and I stayed behind. I watched as Uncle Orion left the room, seemingly unaware of my suspicions, exactly as I wanted him to be. I wanted to confide in Dad about Uncle Orion's betrayal, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Uncle Orion was Dad's brother, his last remaining family. I needed concrete proof of his betrayal. Anything less would create doubt and suspicion, pitting family against family. Couldn't afford to let that happen. Once everyone else had left, Ember and I stood silently. Dad opened his mouth to speak but closed it, his gaze fixed on me. My stomach dropped, even though I knew this moment would come. I had made my decision in the bedroom, and now I had to face the consequences. Has he marked you? Dad asked, his voice calm but his eyes flaring with anger. Now that everyone was gone, he could smell the change in my scent, which mingled with Magnus's, creating a sweet, spicy aroma. Without hesitation, I touched the healing mark on my neck. It wasn't in a she-wolf's nature to be ashamed of her mark. It was meant to be worn proudly, showing the world she had been claimed. He has, I said, nodding. Dad's anger faded, replaced by acceptance. Have you marked him, Aura? Dad asked, continuing his questioning. Yes, Dad, I replied, pressing my lips together tightly. Dad's face fell as he looked at me, sadness filling his eyes. I could see what he was struggling with. He was looking at his little girl, the one he had raised since birth. He was coming to terms with the fact that I wasn't little anymore. I had found my other half and stepped up to help our kingdom. He was struggling to accept that reality, the reality that would leave me in constant danger. He couldn't protect me from the world anymore, keeping threats at bay. I was too old and too stubborn to stay out of the fight. I'm happy for you, Aura, Dad said, forcing a smile and pulling me into his embrace. His scent had always been a comfort to me. Whenever I missed Mom so much it hurt, his scent always calmed me. It used to be mixed with Mom's, but her scent faded when she died, leaving a void in Dad's heart. I couldn't imagine going through the same pain, losing Magnus right after finding him. Thanks, Dad, I murmured, resting my head against his shoulder with my eyes closed. You might want to avoid Lily and Daisy for a while, Dad advised, to avoid raising suspicion. They'll be able to detect the change in your scent, though they might not identify its source. They'll know I've found my mate, I agreed, but they won't know who it is. Get some rest, Aura, Dad said, giving me one last squeeze. We still have to get through tomorrow. Ember and I headed back to the bedroom in silence, Beta Jackson following closely behind. He followed us into the room and closed the door quietly. When he turned to me, his eyebrow was raised in a questioning look. I'm assuming what happened tonight wasn't a mistake, Beta Jackson said, his lips pressed tightly together. You're lucky I was in the kitchen when Dylan fell. He was very much alive. I couldn't afford to tell anyone else, I said, frowning. The fewer who knew, the better. Be careful, Princess, Beta Jackson said seriously. Dylan Lancaster owes you a debt. Make sure you don't owe any of these royals. They'll never let you forget it. I won't, I said, shaking my head. I'll be careful. Good night, Princess, Beta Jackson said, bowing his head. Good night, Ember. Beta Jackson left through the adjoining door, closing it quietly behind him. He knew my name, Ember said, a cheeky grin on her face. Well, of course he knew your name, I chuckled. You've been around since I was 3. Yeah, but no one besides your dad really acknowledges me, Ember shrugged, seemingly unbothered. That's gonna change, I said softly. When we're done with this mess, you'll get the recognition you deserve. Ember gave me a grateful look, but otherwise remained silent. The era of viewing humans as inferior needed to end. When I stepped up to the throne, humans would be treated equally. They already were in my kingdom, but some people clung to outdated beliefs. Such narrow thinking had caused wars, broken families, and separated mates. "I'm going to try to reach Magnus," I murmured, climbing onto my messy bed. "Not going to take a bath this time?" Ember lifted an eyebrow, settling on the couch. "No," I shook my head with a smile. "This bed has more memories." "Too much information," Ember groaned, turning away on the couch. I wasn't listening, though. My eyes had already closed, filled with images of Magnus. The connection of the mate bond was instant. It was easy to reach Magnus now that we were marked and mated. "Magnus?" I murmured quietly. Did everything go according to plan? Magnus's presence flooded my senses, his longing and love wrapping around me like a warm cocoon. "He is safe, little princess." Magnus's voice resonated in my mind, thick with his unusual accent, Magnus's POV. The mark on my neck throbbed against the rough fabric of my shirt, a constant reminder that what was happening was all too real. I had never imagined someone like Princess Aurelia, nor did I foresee her accepting me. Guilt churned in my stomach, an emotion I was unaccustomed to. This small princess was making me feel things I had only heard about but never truly experienced. For the first time, I felt genuine fear in her presence. Fear had been a distant memory, a shadow from my childhood. Back then, I had been a different person, my name different, and fear had been a constant companion. It was beaten out of me over the years, leaving no trace. But that fear resurfaced at the princess's birthday gala when her life had been on the line to save mine. She knew nothing of my past or the dark deeds I had done, yet she accepted me unconditionally. Her confidence in her choice was palpable, unwavering despite anything I could say. My wolf was restless, driven by her desires. Her emerald eyes, wide with longing, begged for me to mark her, to claim her. Her cries of pleasure still echoed in my mind, her soft skin lingering in my senses as I jumped from the window again. The guards stationed at the lower part of the house were momentarily distracted. I circled the property, following Aurelia's urgent instructions. Her orders were secondary to me. I would do anything for her. She could send me to the ends of the earth, and I would follow. Aurelia's compassion for Dylan Lancaster was evident. She wanted to help him in any way she could, but she hadn't fully grasped the implications of her plan. Dylan would owe her a life debt, a debt that demanded repayment. I made my way to the other side of the house, cloaked by the shadows of the forest. The mansion's lights were dimmed, casting everything in darkness. I counted the windows, my gaze scanning the mansion's walls until I found the prince's bedroom. A small balcony jutted out, and through the dark, I could see the orange-haired prince staring out into the night, his face a mix of fear and acceptance. Aidan Lancaster stepped onto the balcony, embracing his son tightly before walking away. The embrace was brief, a final goodbye. The concrete patio below was smooth beneath my feet. This would have to suffice as a convincing death, assuming no one walked in. I listened intently to any sounds coming from Dylan's room, ready to act if necessary. As Dylan fell through the air, I couldn't help but ponder the gravity of the situation. A fall from this height onto concrete would be fatal for anyone, werewolf or not. I moved closer, using the trees and shrubs for cover, and observed the garden. Normally vibrant and colorful, it was now cloaked in darkness and shadows. Princess Aurelia loved this garden, its bright colors and gentle scents. At night, it was unrecognizable. I positioned myself under the balcony, shielding myself from view. Dylan was looking down as if he sensed my presence, his eyes filled with grim determination. He glanced one last time at the balcony doors, then climbed over the railing. I watched as he let go and fell. This was the part I dreaded most. I caught Dylan just in time, his body hitting the ground before I released him and stepped back. I heard someone approaching the bedroom, their footsteps light and hurried. "Dylan?" The voice was cold, reverberating from above. "Play dead," I instructed gruffly, pushing Dylan to the ground. The scene lacked the gore that would have made it convincing. My eyes, adjusted to the darkness, scanned for any signs of intrusion. My success depended on Lily Lancaster's ability to see through the shadows. Lily emerged onto the balcony, her light hair fluttering in the breeze. She peered down, searching for her son. The silence was heavy, filled only by distant crickets and rustling branches. Lily's cries of grief were false, a practiced act of mourning. Aidan Lancaster joined her, embracing her with a pained expression. "Go, Lily," he said gruffly. "Stay with Daisy. I'll take care of him." Once Lily's footsteps faded, I moved from my hiding spot. Aidan remained on the balcony, his face twisted in genuine sorrow. He wasn't pretending. He was mourning his son, even if only temporarily. I pulled Dylan to his feet, gesturing for him to stay quiet as we made our way around the house. Dylan was not adept at moving silently, stumbling over everything in his path. I feared that Lily would notice her son's absence and come searching. I guided Dylan into the forest, the best escape route available. It was dense and dark, providing cover until we reached neutral territory outside the Carrington kingdom. As long as we stayed hidden, Dylan would be safe. Dylan walked beside me in silence, his fiery hair now a deep shade of red in the darkness. After a moment, he broke the silence. "So, you're her mate, huh?" "Yes," I replied, acknowledging the truth for the first time. "And you're helping me out of loyalty to her?" "Yes," I grunted, quickening our pace. Dylan's calm demeanor surprised me, given the gravity of the situation. I remained silent, though his exhaustion was evident. I urged him to keep moving, wary of the approaching patrol teams. "The patrols are distracted for now," I explained. "We need to move quickly before they return." The forest grew quieter as we continued, the faint smell of Dylan's human scent fading with each step. Shifting was not an option. It would only make his presence more obvious. We had to rely on the cover of the forest and our speed. We moved on in silence, occasionally breaking into a jog. The minutes ticked by slowly until we finally reached the edge of the forest, safe for now. Aurelia's POV. I let Magnus's soothing voice guide me into sleep, feeling his presence linger until the darkness completely enveloped me. "Good night, little princess," Magnus whispered, his words the last I heard before sleep took over. I jolted awake at the sound of my father's voice cutting through my thoughts. "Aura, are you awake?" Dad's voice echoed in my mind. "I am now," I muttered, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. Ember was still curled up on the couch, her wild curls peeking out from under the blanket. "Aidan Lancaster has decided to hold a funeral pyre for his son," Dad informed me. "It should be straightforward. The ceremony will take place tomorrow night. The royals will leave after it's over." "And what about our dinner tonight?" I winced at the harsh light streaming through the curtains. "Everything's set," Dad replied. "I also wanted to let you know that Evander Winslow left last night." "What?" I frowned. "Why did you let him leave?" "We interrogated him thoroughly, but he didn't divulge anything useful." Dad's tone was irked. "That doesn't mean there's nothing left to uncover." "Evander Winslow is tangled up in all of this mess," I said, shaking my head. "It's going to be harder to reach him now that he's back in his own kingdom." "I disagree," Dad said, shaking his head. "Evander Winslow is likely feeling too secure now, believing the suspicion has passed. People tend to slip up when they're comfortable, Aura." "I see," I raised an eyebrow. "But we're not in Winslow's kingdom. We won't know if he's doing anything wrong." "On the contrary," Dad smirked. "I have eyes everywhere, Aura. Keep me posted, okay?" I smiled softly as I got out of bed. "Of course," Dad sighed through the mind link. "As much as I dislike your involvement, it was inevitable." "Sorry, Dad," I chuckled. I didn't wake Ember for another hour. I connected with Magnus, already missing the sound of his voice. Magnus had managed to leave the Carrington kingdom and was heading north. They were making their way to open territory east of Zane's kingdom. While this area offered some safety from other royals, it also came with its own dangers. Open territory didn't follow kingdom rules, making it easier for an assassin to slip through. It was a risk Magnus was willing to take. If they needed to leave neutral territory, Zane's kingdom would be their safest option. I'd have to reveal the truth to yet another person, but it would ensure their safety. I jumped in the shower to give Ember time to wake up. The steaming water helped clear the remnants of sleep from my mind. By the time I finished and got dressed, Ember was fully awake. We headed to the kitchen to help prepare dinner. The chefs were preparing an elaborate 4-course meal, fitting for Mason Beaumont's visit. As 6 o'clock approached, the tension in the house increased. Ember and I changed into outfits that were elegant, but not overly formal. I chose a simple thigh-length dress with pockets and paired it with sandals. I offered Ember a dress from my closet, which she accepted reluctantly. She felt out of place, but I disagreed. For a week now, Ember had been more than just my assistant. I struggled with finding the right title for someone who had supported me so much, but one thing was certain: Ember belonged by my side. I wrestled with the decision of whether to wear my necklace. Uncle Orion would recognize it immediately and know I had given him a fake. He would see through my eyes that I was aware of his betrayal. "I think we should wear it," Kira suggested. "But we don't even know what it does," I countered. "Is it worth the risk?" "Put it on," Ember said, glancing at the jewelry in my hands. "It's better on you than not, and your uncle would have found out eventually." I fastened the necklace around my neck, feeling a rush of warmth spread from the pendant to the rest of my body. The sensation was comforting, almost like a long-lost friend returning. The necklace's gentle tingles made me realize how much I had missed that feeling. Next, I had to cover my mark. My dress had a low cut, exposing my shoulders and collarbones. The necklace and my healing mark would be on display. The mark had finished scabbing over and was nearly healed, showcasing Magnus's unique symbol on my skin. Ember helped me cover the mark with makeup. She used a white base to blend it into my skin, dabbing concealer over it with precision. My stomach churned. It felt unnatural to hide a mark that was meant to be a point of pride. With the mark hidden, Dad mind-linked me to come downstairs. We needed to greet Mason Beaumont at the front door, as was proper etiquette. Ember and I descended the stairs, joining Dad and Uncle Orion in the foyer beneath the glittering chandelier. Both men were dressed in clean-cut but not overly formal attire. As I stood beside Dad, Ember to my left, I could feel Uncle Orion's gaze burning into me. My dress revealed my shoulders and collarbones, and the necklace was visible for all to see. I turned to meet Uncle Orion's gaze. Dad's eyes were fixed ahead, his brows knitted in irritation as he focused on the front door. Uncle Orion's eyes locked onto mine, burning with a mix of surprise and understanding. I kept my face impassive, though I could sense his realization about the change in my scent. The flicker of relief I felt was because it seemed he couldn't pinpoint the mystery man who was my mate. Our gaze was broken when the front door creaked open. Mason Beaumont appeared in the entryway, looking more self-assured than ever. A tall man with a bulky build and a stern expression stood beside him. Mason was dressed impeccably, his black button-down shirt stretching over his muscular arms, and his dark slacks clinging to his powerful legs. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and his face wore a mask of courteousness. "Welcome, Mason Beaumont," Dad murmured, his tone hard as he addressed the other royal. "What a pleasure to see the Carrington family again," Mason said with a wide grin, flashing me a look that seemed to hide more than it revealed. "Thank you for accepting my invitation," I replied, keeping my expression neutral. I spoke first, knowing Dad wouldn't break his silence. "Don't mind the man with me," Mason said with a grin, gesturing to his imposing bodyguard. "I thought it was a good idea to have someone like this around, given the times." Mason's grin irked me, as did the politeness he tried so hard to project. Despite his efforts, his arrogance was unmistakable. "Dinner is this way," I said, nodding for them to follow. Dad took his seat at the head of the table, while Ember and I settled on his left. Uncle Orion occupied the seat to Dad's right, and Mason Beaumont took the opposite end. Mason's silent bodyguard stationed himself against the far wall, his observant eyes scanning the room. "Has there been an attempt on your life, Mason?" I asked, my gaze piercing through him. Mason's lips twitched into a mischievous smirk. "Just one attempt," he said, his eyes dancing with a troubling excitement. "You can never be too cautious these days." "How unfortunate," I murmured, my eyes still fixed on his. Dad cleared his throat, masking it with a sip of water. Uncle Orion remained quiet, his gaze shifting between Mason and me. "He's playing his part," Kira scoffed, feigning concern for his family. "He and Mason must be working together." "They probably met today," I replied to Kira. "I trust Dad had the foresight to have someone tail Mason." "I'm not sure," Kira frowned. "Dad still seems to trust Uncle Orion." "There's always more than meets the eye with Dad," I said, turning my focus back to dinner. The servants brought out the first course, a selection of appetizers. Uncle Orion's eyes frequently darted to the necklace around my neck. Each time, I met his gaze with a knowing look. Dad tried his best to avoid engaging with Mason, keeping the conversation light and sparse. Mason, however, seemed intent on drawing me into conversation. He was a master at concealing his true feelings. For a brief moment, his gaze flickered to my necklace, a familiar warmth spreading through me as though it was warning me. Before anyone else could notice, Mason's eyes were elsewhere. "It was a shame about your bodyguard, Princess," Mason said, his eyes glinting with feigned sympathy. "To trust someone with something so valuable, it's truly a terrible situation." My body stiffened with anger at his words. Kira growled within me, furious that someone would speak ill of her mate. I caught Ember's warning glance from the corner of my eye and forced myself to relax, masking the anger that threatened to surface. "It is indeed a terrible thing," I replied evenly. "Yet I've learned that evidence can be manipulated, even from the most reliable sources." Mason's eyes widened in exaggerated surprise. "So you believe your bodyguard is innocent?" "I never said that," I shrugged nonchalantly. "I've just learned not to take everything at face value." "A valuable lesson," Dad grunted in agreement. "It certainly is." Mason's eyes flashed with something I couldn't quite place, his smile tightening. "Is this the assistant I had the pleasure of meeting?" Mason's gaze shifted to Ember. If anyone could match Mason in concealing their emotions, it was Ember. Her expression was a blank slate as she met Mason's eyes, showing no hint of distaste. "This is Ember," I said, offering her a smile, "though I believe she deserves more than just the title of assistant." "Pardon my curiosity," Mason said with a cheeky smile, "but how does a human rise to such prominence in the largest werewolf kingdom?" "Ember has earned my trust completely," Dad said gruffly, his eyes narrowing as he looked at Mason. "She has proven herself time and again. My daughter is capable of making her own choices, and I support this one wholeheartedly." The tension in the room was palpable, mostly stemming from Dad. Mason was adept at masking his disdain for Dad, while Dad struggled to keep his composure around Mason. Their shared history was one Dad had kept from me. Mason Beaumont was the epitome of the perfect guest. He was charming when needed, adept at hiding his true feelings, and always seemed to have an underlying meaning behind his words. He was a good-looking, charismatic man whose smile quickened your heartbeat and whose gaze was reminiscent of Magnus's. His dark eyes, almost black, held a depth that was both captivating and unsettling. Mason Beaumont flashed Ember a grin that I could easily see through. It was the kind of smile that masked a hidden agenda. Ember seemed to sense it too, her eyes narrowing slightly in response. "Are the Lancaster family not joining us for dinner? I thought they were staying here for a while, along with the other young royal," Mason inquired. "Zane," I clarified, my lips pressing together. "Right, Zane," Mason said with a smile that made it seem as if we were old acquaintances. "Aidan and Lily Lancaster are mourning," Dad said gruffly, his voice thick with sympathy. "Their son recently passed." "Oh, really?" Mason's eyes widened in feigned surprise, his voice dripping with false empathy. Despite his practiced demeanor, I could see the curiosity lurking beneath. "How did that happen under the Alpha King's roof?" "He took his own life," I said, my voice cracking slightly on the last word as I focused on my half-finished plate. Mason shook his head slowly, a frown of mock sadness on his face. "Such a tragedy. Please extend my condolences to the Lancaster family." "Thank you," I said quietly, trying to keep my tone neutral. I had no illusions about Mason's sincerity. His words were hollow. The rest of dinner dragged on with strained conversations that only wore on my nerves further. Occasionally, I felt the necklace against my chest grow warm, a sign of my rising frustration. It seemed to react to my emotions, keeping me on edge. "Might I have a word with you, Princess?" Mason asked, his eyes sparkling with a false innocence. Dad stiffened noticeably, and Uncle Orion tensed as well. "Let me handle this," I told Dad through the mind link. "Certainly," I said with a polite nod, excusing myself from the table. I placed a hand on Ember's shoulder as she stood, giving her a look that I hoped conveyed my wish for her to stay behind. This was a conversation I needed to handle on my own. Mason's bodyguard stayed put, his eyes surveying the room with a sharp intelligence. Mason and I walked in silence to the back door. As soon as we stepped outside, I inhaled deeply, grateful for the cool night air that eased the tension I felt during dinner. Once outside, Mason turned to me with a knowing smile. something dark flickering in his eyes. "Princess Aurelia Carrington," he said, pronouncing my full name with a hint of mockery. My heart raced, and the necklace warmed against my skin as his gaze wandered over me, lingering on my neck. For a brief moment I thought he was focused on the covered mark. "Mated, though you try to hide it," Mason observed, his voice dripping with rueful irony. He was controlled, revealing only what he intended to. I struggled to find my voice, the reality of the situation sinking in. "I am," I admitted, embracing the truth. Mason's gaze remained fixed on my neck. "Would you mind?" he asked, his eyes glinting with mischief as his hand reached towards me. "Go ahead," I said, swallowing my fear. I could feel the warmth of the necklace against my chest, a silent reminder of the bond I had with Magnus. Mason's finger traced lightly over the mark on my neck, feeling the spot beneath my makeup. He then brushed his finger along my collarbones and the edge of my necklace. "Mated to the bodyguard," he said, his voice carrying a confident finality. I was taken aback, my shock evident despite my efforts to remain composed. "How did you know?" I finally managed to ask, the cool air barely registering against my skin as I focused on Mason. "I'll explain, but first, hear me out," Mason said with a sly smirk, running a hand through his dark hair. "I'll listen," I replied, recalling my recent conversation with Lily. I had promised to hear Mason out, but made no commitments beyond that. "Thank you, little princess," Mason said with a deepening smirk. "You have so much potential, so much to offer, born into power you barely understand." His voice was soft, his eyes intense. "I understand what I've been given," I said, frowning. "It's not my fault if others have expectations of me." "You never anticipated this. The game's played out of sight," Mason said, his tone almost wistful under the moonlight. "Yet here you are, engaged in the very games your father avoids." His words struck a nerve. It was clear that Mason and Dad had a history, one tinged with mutual disdain. If Mason thought he could turn me against my father, he was mistaken. "My father does what he believes is best," I said sharply. "He's an exceptional leader. Our kingdom stands as proof." But your father still treats you like a child," Mason said, shaking his head with a feigned sympathy. "He shares just enough to make you feel trusted. He only reveals what he thinks you can handle." My anger flared. "That's not true." "It isn't," Mason raised an eyebrow. "If you say so. But when the lies become too overwhelming, ask your father about Valkyrie Kensington." I stored the name in my mind, standing silent. I refused to let Mason's words taint my view of my father. Whatever past they shared, it didn't involve me, and I wouldn't let Mason drive a wedge between us. "You live in a kingdom built on trust and familiarity, where respect and authority have diminished," Mason said with regret. "Little princess, if you were to ally with me, I'd never deceive you. I'd give you all the answers you seek, a gift I've not offered anyone else." "And what would you want in return?" I asked, my tone skeptical. Information isn't free. That was one of my first lessons. Mason's intentions were clear, and I wasn't about to fall for his manipulations. He wanted my allegiance, my kingdom, and to undo everything my father had built. "I want you, Aurelia," Mason said, his voice steady, his eyes burning with intensity. I couldn't tell if his emotions were genuine or merely a tactic to sway me. The mate bond with Magnus was a powerful connection, one that spanned great distances and was not easily broken. The thought of leaving Magnus for Mason was unthinkable. "You know I have a mate," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "Mates can be discarded," Mason said, his gaze lingering on me, "as can mate bonds." "And if I refuse to leave my mate?" I asked, meeting his eyes with resolve. The necklace remained warm against my chest, a reassuring presence. "Then I'll consider it a great loss. Such a beauty should belong to someone better than Magnus," Mason said, shaking his head. "But I don't give up easily. I'm very patient, and I always get what I want." Mason's disdain for Magnus was palpable, more personal than mere rivalry. "You know Magnus?" I asked, trying to decipher the emotion in his eyes. Mason's smile turned reptilian. "Yes, Magnus. He once went by another name. I, however, called him Big Brother." "Big Brother?" My jaw dropped, the facade I'd carefully maintained crumbling as I struggled to process Mason's revelation. His face was an impassive mask, betraying no hint of deceit or emotion. "It seems you're quite unfamiliar with your mate's past," Mason said, shaking his head with a hint of pity. "What a pity. If you were mine, Nothing would be kept from you. You would never be left in the dark. Why isn't Magnus in line for the throne if he's your brother? I demanded, trying to ignore Mason's provocative comment. My eyes locked onto his, demanding answers. Magnus, as you know him, loathes leadership, Mason replied with a grim smile. His talent lies in taking lives, not in ruling. He never had the skills needed to govern. There are plenty of royals skilled in ending lives, I countered, my gaze unwavering. They let others do the dirty work while they keep their hands clean. Mason's expression remained unyielding, but I sensed he understood my implication. He was the mastermind behind the attack at my birthday gala, not Magnus. It seemed unimaginable that someone would frame their own sibling. Magnus lacks the finesse to remain unnoticed, Mason continued, his eyes gleaming with a strange light. He enjoys killing up close and personal. He lacks the patience for subtlety. I find that admirable, I said firmly. He takes responsibility for his actions instead of hiding behind others. Ah, you're so innocent, Mason chuckled, shaking his head. My brother has done things you couldn't possibly fathom. I'll let him tell me that, I said, my voice firm. I trust him completely. He deserves the chance to explain himself. I think I'll give you a gift, Princess, Mason said with a predatory smile, stepping closer. My heart raced at the proximity and my stomach twisted. His nearness felt unsettling, especially since my heart belonged to Magnus. I'm quite taken with you, Aurelia. Your innocence is captivating, yet you're also strong and clever. You have great potential. I don't need any gifts, I replied, shaking my head. I remembered Beta Jackson's advice. I couldn't afford to owe someone like Mason Beaumont anything. There are no strings attached, Mason said, his voice smooth and devoid of emotion. I'll give you and my brother a chance. When you see him for what he truly is, I hope you'll reconsider. I could make you happy. His voice was soothing, almost hypnotic, as he brushed his thumb against my cheek. I fought the urge to recoil from his touch. It felt wrong. He was no substitute for Magnus. What is Magnus exactly? I asked, looking up at Mason with a mixture of curiosity and trepidation. He's a greater monster than I am, Mason said softly, his eyes darkening. Aurelia, Vesper's here. Ember's voice broke the tension, and I let out an exasperated sigh. Vesper had arrived early, unaware of Mason's visit. Send her to my room, I instructed Ember. She shot me an impatient look before turning her gaze to Mason, her golden eyes hardening before she vanished inside. I can see why the human is your assistant, Mason said with a chuckle, a sly glint in his eye. What do you mean by that? I asked, a headache beginning to form. I was too exhausted to decipher his cryptic remarks. Don't trouble yourself with it, Mason said, amusement still evident in his eyes. Go attend to your friends. I'll be leaving soon. Reluctantly, I turned my back on Mason and headed inside. Dad was leaning against the far wall of the living room, close by in case I needed him. I wasn't about to let you face him alone, Dad said, shaking his head and holding a glass of whiskey. Thanks, Dad, I said softly. Mason's words about my father echoed in my mind, but I refused to let them sow doubt. Dad was a stern ruler, but he was devoted to his people, and I trusted him implicitly. Go on and spend time with your friends. I'll keep an eye on our guest, Dad said, his disdain evident in his tone as he glanced toward the back door. I managed to slip into my room unnoticed, my thoughts already turning to Lily Lancaster. If she caught me in the hallway, she'd likely detect the change in my scent. I couldn't rely on Mason Beaumont to keep my mate's identity a secret. His secrets came at a price, and I wasn't willing to pay. Vesper and Ember were already in my room, caught up in one of their usual disagreements. You were supposed to arrive at the time she gave you, Ember said, rolling her eyes. You could have given us a heads up about your early arrival. How was I to know Mason Beaumont would be dining with you? Vesper retorted, crossing her arms. I'm not the first to get news around here. Their argument continued as I took a deep breath, trying to calm the turmoil inside me. Vesper shot Ember and me a piercing look, and a wave of guilt washed over me. I hadn't shared any of the recent events with her. My guilt faded somewhat as I recalled that Vesper was the one who had spread the rumor about Lily Lancaster being behind the attack at my birthday gala. That was precisely why I had been cautious about what I shared with her. Are we supposed to report to you every time something happens? Ember's honey-colored eyes were alight with irritation. "You don't have to come running to me, but a heads up would be nice," Vesper retorted, clearly agitated. "I had to hear from my mom that Dylan Lancaster died." "Aurelia and her father didn't want that information broadcasted everywhere," Ember said, her patience visibly wearing thin as her fingers drummed impatiently against her leg. "And what's that supposed to mean?" Vesper shot back, clearly annoyed. "Aura, why haven't you told me all the drama that's been going on?" Vesper's voice held an edge of frustration. I let out a weary sigh, dreading being dragged into their argument. Though I wanted to stay out of it, I knew I had to confront Vesper about the information I had shared with her. She would deny spreading the rumor, but I had only confided in her. Ember's frustration was palpable. She had less tolerance for Vesper's antics than I did. "Ember, could you grab us some snacks and drinks from the kitchen?" I tried to convey my intent through my gaze, hoping she'd understand. "The kitchen?" Ember raised a dark eyebrow, clearly questioning my request. "There should be 2 guards at the end of the hall. Have one of them accompany you," I instructed. "Tell them I said so." Ember seemed to understand my unspoken request, letting out an exasperated huff before rising from the couch. I watched as Vesper rolled her eyes at Ember's retreating figure. "Don't roll your eyes at me," Ember snapped, her tone sharp enough to almost elicit a chuckle from me. Once the door closed behind Ember, Vesper wasted no time in launching into her tirade. "Blames me for coming early," Vesper scoffed, "like I was supposed to know." "Half the town knew Mason Beaumont was coming," I pointed out, shrugging. "In a kingdom this size, keeping secrets was nearly impossible." "I didn't hear the news," Vesper shrugged. "And what's up with the 2 of you? Neither of you has talked to me in days, and now I'm hearing all this." I pursed my lips, trying to find the right words to address Vesper's behavior. It was clear she would become defensive, but I needed to address the issue. "Remember what I told you about Lily Lancaster and the attack at my birthday gala?" I asked, watching confusion flood into her blue eyes. "Of course I remember," Vesper said with a shrug. "I couldn't forget something like that." "Well, I overheard some servants repeating that information," I continued, my eyes fixed on her. A flicker of suspicion crossed Vesper's face, followed by a defensive frown. "I had nothing to do with that. It must have been Ember or someone else you told." "Ember didn't tell anyone," I said, shrugging. "As you know, I've been with Ember for days now." "Are you accusing me of this?" Vesper's voice rose in disbelief. "Really, Aurelia?" "I'm not accusing you of anything," I said, my voice tight. "Out of the 3 of us, 2 haven't said a word. That leaves you." I could see Vesper's facade beginning to crack. Instead of apologizing, her anger flared. "Can you really blame me? Even after the attack at your birthday gala, you and your dad let her into your home." "I lied, Vesper," I said through gritted teeth, my frustration growing. Kira growled in irritation at Vesper's dismissive attitude. I had trusted her with sensitive information, and she treated it like a trivial rumor. "You lied?" Vesper's mouth dropped open in surprise. "Lily Lancaster wasn't responsible for the attack," I clarified, though I knew she wasn't directly involved. "Then who was?" Vesper demanded, her eyes narrowing. "Why would I tell you that?" I countered. "The last time I shared something with you, the entire staff knew within minutes." Vesper was about to retort when her gaze fell on my necklace. Her blue eyes, previously filled with anger, shifted to curiosity. "I thought you gave that to your uncle?" she asked, her eyes flickering between the necklace and me. "I never told you about that," I said, baffled. "How did you know?" "I never mentioned that to you," I said, a scoff escaping me. "How did you find out?" Vesper's eyes widened, her mouth opening and closing as she tried to form words. She was caught off guard, and I could tell she hadn't anticipated being exposed. The situation was far more complex than I'd imagined. I felt like a child who'd stumbled into a game meant for adults. Just when I thought I was gaining ground, another complication emerged. Instead of retreating, Vesper's expression darkened with rage. Her face lost all trace of friendliness, and her once warm eyes became cold and distant. Her lips curled into a sneer. "Princess Aurelia," she said, her tone dripping with disdain. "Born the luckiest girl in the world, and you don't even realize it." "I don't see how that's relevant, Vesper," I replied, my voice reflecting the confusion and hurt I felt. Vesper's transformation was startling. She was now a picture of resentment. "You wouldn't," Vesper said, shaking her head dismissively. "You think you're a major player in all of this? Sweetheart, your royal privilege blinds you to the real game." My jaw dropped as I listened to her tirade. Her face was flushing with anger, her hands trembling. "Vesper, what is this about?" I asked, my frown deepening. "How did you know about my necklace?" "It comes from 16 years of bitterness, Aurelia," Vesper said with a dark chuckle. "You've been too oblivious to notice." I struggled to process her words, my mind reeling. I could handle her insults in my own time, but right now I needed answers. Her words felt like daggers, but I fought to stay composed. "How did you know about my necklace?" I demanded again, my voice firmer. "I never told you I gave it to Uncle Orion." "Uncle Orion and I have been in touch," Vesper said, her smile turning bitter. She emphasized Uncle Orion with a certain venom. "Since when do you and Uncle Orion talk?" I asked, bewildered. Vesper had no reason to interact with him. "Uncle Orion and I have been in contact for some time, given that he's my father," she said with a smirk, clearly enjoying my shock. "How is that possible?" I asked, shaking my head in disbelief. "It's simple. Sex, cousin," Vesper said, rolling her eyes. "Why didn't you figure that out sooner?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Vesper had managed to keep this secret for years, and I wondered why she hadn't revealed it earlier. "It was wiser to keep it hidden," Vesper shrugged, her expression tinged with disappointment. "This wasn't how we planned things, but now you know the truth." I noticed Vesper's hand moving behind her back. My instincts kicked in just in time. She pulled out a silver dagger from her waistband, the blade gleaming ominously. I grabbed her wrist as the knife came dangerously close to my stomach, feeling the cold metal scrape against my dress. Her eyes were filled with a fierce, unrestrained hatred. "Dad had started my training a year ago, something I never thought I'd actually use. I wasn't an expert, but I could defend myself when necessary. At that moment, I was grateful for the training. Without it, I might have been in serious danger." Vesper's strength surprised me, a stark contrast to what I'd believed. Her force was formidable, but my training against werewolves helped me hold my ground. Killing Vesper was never my intention. I needed her subdued until the guards arrived. Despite her animosity, I wasn't driven by hatred. I twisted her wrist, and she grimaced in pain. Vesper switched the knife to her other hand, indicating some degree of training. Her ability to fight was unexpected, especially given her known aversion to physical exertion. I barely recalled my training, but my body seemed to remember. Kira urged me to shift, to end Vesper's threat, but I fought to stay focused. My mom's necklace warmed against my neck, a sensation that added to the tension. Vesper lunged at me with the knife, her eyes wild. I managed to evade the blade, but I knew I couldn't kill her. She held crucial information. The necklace's warmth intensified, almost painfully so. As Vesper came at me again, I punched her, hearing a sickening crunch as my fist connected with her nose. Blood streamed from her face, but she remained relentless, slamming her shoulder into my stomach. We crashed to the floor, the knife still clutched in Vesper's hand. I ended up on my back, sliding across the linoleum. A surge of energy pulsed through me, emanating from my necklace. My head tilted back, overwhelmed by the crackling energy. The sensation was disorienting. When the energy dissipated, I saw Vesper fall to the floor. I couldn't bring myself to look at the aftermath. The black spots in my vision faded as I tried to process what had just happened. Vesper's tangled blonde hair obscured her face, her breath coming in ragged gasps. My own head throbbed violently, but I managed to stay conscious, barely holding on. The bedroom door burst open with a crash, and Uncle Orion stormed in, his gaze immediately fixed on the scene before him, and I could feel myself slipping into a state of shock, oddly numb to the chaos around me. I imagined my father's reaction to the sight of me dead, and felt a pang of grief that was quickly overshadowed by the cold emptiness in Uncle Orion's eyes. "Stupid girl," Uncle Orion spat, his voice devoid of empathy, letting her petty jealousy get the best of her. "What?" I shook my head in confusion, trying to make sense of his words. "You're her father." "Don't try to stand. You're weak from using the necklace," Uncle Orion said, a hint of disdain in his voice. "I do care about you, Aurelia. Is that why you sold my necklace to Mason? I glared at him, anger and hurt mingling in my voice. That necklace belongs to his family. It was never truly yours. Mason Beaumont is an ally, Uncle Orion retorted dismissively. Your father was too blind to see it. No, he's not, I countered, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. He's just very good at manipulating people. You were never going to make it to the throne, Aurelia, Uncle Orion murmured coldly, his hand closing around the knife Vesper had used. It was only a matter of time. Your childhood friend managed to murder you, dying in the process. It's messy, but necessary. We gave you many chances, Aura, but you kept refusing. The gravity of killing my best friend weighed heavily on me, making it hard to focus on Uncle Orion's cruel words. My limbs felt heavy, lifeless, as I struggled to defend myself. The knife surged forward, but it never reached me. Beta Jackson burst into the room, his body slamming into Uncle Orion with force. Jackson, stronger and more skilled than Uncle Orion, managed to fend off his attacks, though not without taking a few wounds himself. The werewolf hissed in pain as his claws dug into Uncle Orion's side, throwing him aside with a powerful shove. Ember stood in the doorway, her golden eyes wide with shock. She glanced around the room, taking in the scene before her. Mind link your dad, Aura, Beta Jackson grunted, pressing a shirt against Uncle Orion's bleeding side. My mind was a fog, but Ember's voice cut through it with urgency. Her gaze was intense, filled with concern as she deliberately avoided looking at Vesper's lifeless form. Snap out of it, Aura, Ember said sharply, gripping my arms. Mind link your dad. Beta Jackson heard everything. Dad, I need you to come to my room, I faltered, struggling to find the words. How could I convey something like this without breaking down? Just a minute, Aura. It's chaotic down here. Mason Beaumont left half an hour ago, thankfully, but Lily Lancaster is missing. We think she fled. Aiden and Daisy Lancaster are still here, Dad's voice crackled in my mind. I focused on his words, using them to distract myself from the horror I had just experienced. Lily Lancaster had left, abandoning her husband and daughter. Vesper attacked me. My voice wavered, a sob breaking free. Tears stung my eyes as I tried to process what I had done. Dad's voice faded as he ended our mind link. Dad arrived within minutes, but I barely registered his presence. Beta Jackson was engaged in a heated discussion with Dad, his anger evident as he shifted his gaze between me and Uncle Orion. I assumed Jackson was explaining what had happened and what Uncle Orion had tried to do. Aura? Dad's voice cut through the fog, his hand appearing before my eyes as he sought my attention. Aura, are you all right? I'm all right, I replied, my gaze shifting to Uncle Orion. His face was ashen, sweat glistening on his forehead as he lay bleeding on the floor. I need you to tell me what happened, Dad said quietly, his eyes piercing mine. Vesper tried to kill me, I said, pushing aside my own turmoil to focus on my father. Then Uncle Orion tried to do the same. He's her father. Dad's body tensed, the impact of my words hitting him hard as he processed the betrayal. His own brother had conspired against him, against his daughter. I began to understand the depth of the treachery that had surrounded me. I want him stabilized, Dad ordered Beta Jackson, his voice cold with rage. Put him in a cell, heavily guarded. Ensure he gets immediate medical attention. Dad turned his back on his brother, allowing his men to carry Uncle Orion away. He knelt beside me, Ember at his side. I think she's in shock, Ember observed, her voice tight with concern. Not that I blame her. Aura, I have some news for you, Dad said softly, guiding my attention away from Vesper's body. News? What is it? I asked, struggling to keep my eyes open. Fatigue weighed heavily on me, my mind craving rest. Magnus's name is clear. Mason Beaumont found evidence implicating someone else in the attack, Dad murmured, though his tone remained uncertain. Mason Beaumont found evidence against Lily Lancaster. 2 days later, Mason Beaumont had kept his promise. Despite my certainty that he was behind the attack at my birthday gala, Mason had unearthed evidence implicating Lily Lancaster. This evidence cleared Magnus's name, allowing him to return to me. I was puzzled by Mason's motive for giving Magnus and me a chance, but I wasn't about to argue. It was clear Mason hoped Magnus and I would fail, anticipating that I would turn to him instead. His way of trying to win me over was hardly endearing. Trying to have me killed on my birthday wasn't exactly a romantic gesture. Magnus and Dylan were back within 2 days. Magnus, naturally, had been skeptical of Mason's intentions. I could sense his jealousy towards Dylan as I shared that Mason wanted a chance with me. I had told Magnus what Mason had revealed, that they were brothers. I didn't ask for any further explanation, feeling too overwhelmed to handle more details. With Lily Lancaster potentially on the run, Dylan had returned with a vow to deal with his sister, insisting she was powerless without Lily. Magnus could sense my distress, the weight of that night's events heavy on me. My nightmares, once filled with images of my mother's murder, now featured Vesper and Uncle Orion. I was tormented by guilt over what happened to Vesper. The necklace, which had acted on its own to protect me, now terrified me. I never wanted to kill Vesper, but the necklace had forced my hand. I wanted to rip it off and hide it somewhere, but I knew it was safest around my neck. Only I could remove it, and I wasn't willing to take it off for anyone. Dad spent as much time with me as he could, though Uncle Orion's betrayal was clearly gnawing at him. He wasn't as shocked as I had expected. After placing me in bed the night of the attack, he returned early the next morning. I had told Magnus everything before sleep claimed me. When Dad came back, I was already awake, and I noticed Ember was up too, her eyes lost in the darkness. We hadn't discussed Vesper's death. Though she had always been temperamental, she had been a part of our lives since childhood. Our mothers, best friends for years, had raised us together. Yet Vesper's hatred had remained hidden, and we had been blind to it. The next morning, Dad knocked softly on my bedroom door. Ember and I remained silent, lying in the darkness. When Dad cracked the door open and peeked inside, his voice broke the silence. "Aura?" His rough voice jolted me from my thoughts. I lifted my head to meet his gaze, stifling a yawn. "We're awake," I said, my eyes sore from lack of sleep. "You can turn on the light." Dad flicked the switch and the harsh light made us both groan. Despite the horrors we'd faced, I refused to be seen as fragile. I needed to stay strong, at least in front of others. Dad sat on the edge of my bed, his face twisted with discomfort. His eyes held a pained expression, as if reliving the words he was about to speak. "I sent someone to follow Mason Beaumont yesterday," Dad began, clearing his throat. "Orion knew about my plans to send a spy. His behavior had been suspicious for a while, so I sent a second spy, one he didn't know about." This revelation caught my interest, a welcome distraction from my swirling thoughts. I needed to focus on something other than my darkening mood. "Mason Beaumont and Orion met," Dad continued, his expression hardening. "The spy I sent nearly lost his life, but he reported back. Orion thought he sold Mason your necklace, but it was a fake." Dad offered me a small grin, his eyebrow lifting in acknowledgement of my role in this. "It was a good idea," I said with a shrug. "He kept asking for the necklace. Something didn't feel right." "If I had paid more attention," Dad said, shaking his head, "I should have realized sooner." "You couldn't have known," I said, trying to reassure him. "We found out in time. If we hadn't, things could have been much worse. The gravity of our narrow escape hung between us. If we had been any later, I might not have survived." "He will never see daylight again," Dad said, his gaze fixed on his hands. "I'm going to speak to Vesper's mother. I need to understand her role in all of this." "I think that's a good idea," I agreed, struggling to suppress the guilt rising in my throat. "I'll come to you if I learn anything, Aura," Dad said softly, his smile gentle. "I hate leaving you in the dark." After Dad left my room, he suggested we get some fresh air. He thought we should grab breakfast and head to the gardens, a place Mom used to visit whenever she was troubled. She always said the sweet scents and the buzzing of insects helped her clear her mind. I avoided the gazebo. Just thinking about it soured my mood. Ember and I walked in silence, but it was a comfortable silence. I knew Ember didn't blame me, yet it didn't change the fact that we had both lost a friend, no matter what she had said or done. "I keep trying to remember if she ever let anything slip." Ember broke the silence with a frown. "I'm doing the same," I said, trailing my fingers over the soft rose petals. "She was always our best friend. She was really good at hiding things." "It seems so," Ember agreed, her frown deepening. "I know you blame the necklace, Aura." I absently touched my necklace, feeling the cold metal against my skin. Ember must have noticed my grimace. "I didn't want to kill her," I said firmly, though my insides twisted painfully. It was the same as at my birthday gala, only this time I didn't pass out. The necklace was protecting you. Vesper was a threat, Ember said with conviction, her voice steady. I have a theory about why you didn't pass out. I focused on Ember's words, eager for a distraction from my own thoughts. I'd rather think about anything else to erase the image of Vesper from my mind. What's your theory? I asked, watching a beetle climb the thick stem of a sunflower. Well, at your birthday gala, 10 men lost their lives, Ember said, and last night was one. You think it's about the number of people I kill? My voice was tinged with contempt. I think it's about the energy it takes to kill that many people, but it's just a theory, Ember shrugged, though her face remained serious. I'm only guessing. Vesper was my friend too, Aura, but you can't blame yourself, Ember said. Vesper was trying to kill you. The necklace did its job. I let Ember's words sink in, and although I believed them, the guilt didn't fade. The guilt was a living force, a constant reminder of the previous night. I know, I said with a frown. Why do I still feel guilty? It shows you're a good ruler, Ember said, her frown deepening. You don't want to kill, but you still protect yourself and your family. I think you should be the Alpha Queen, Ember, I said with a soft chuckle, inhaling the sweet scent of the flowers. This kingdom wouldn't survive with me in charge, Ember shook her head. You're right, I said with a genuine smile. Let me know if you ever want the job. Don't hold your breath, Ember laughed, her gaze shifting to something a few feet away. Looks like your mate is back. Magnus stood a short distance away, his expression unreadable. It had been 2 days since I last saw him, but it felt like years. He looked the same as before, except now he was covered in dirt. His strong face showed little emotion, but his eyes were wary. He carried a thought with him, one that made him feel undeserving of me. His past made him see himself as a monster, unworthy of a mate. He seemed to be waiting for me to change my mind, to realize the mistake I'd made. I was determined not to let him believe that. Someday, he'd understand that moving on from the past is possible. I threw myself at Magnus, wrapping my arms around his neck. He took a step back, but I held on tightly. My fingers tangled in his hair, marveling at its softness. When his lips met mine, a surge of sparks shot through me, easing some of the torment within me and unwinding the knot in my stomach. When I pulled away, breathless, I got lost in the darkness of his eyes. He held me close, as if afraid I might slip away, his gaze burning with longing and love. You get into a lot of trouble when I'm gone, Magnus said with a frown, his dark eyebrow lifting as he studied my face. His thick accent and rough voice made my heart race. It won't happen again. I have my bodyguard back, I said with a chuckle, my fingers brushing the stubble on his jaw. 1 month later, I stood before my full-length mirror, scrutinizing the deep green silk dress that cascaded down my body. It seemed to stretch endlessly, accentuating my every movement, while my hair tumbled down my back in dark waves. Dad had offered to call in stylists for today's events, but I'd turned down the offer. My stomach was a bundle of nerves and knots, and I didn't want a team of people buzzing around me. Ember had volunteered to do my makeup, and her steady hands applied my eyeliner with practiced ease. The dress looks amazing, Ember said, giving it a long, approving glance as I stood in front of the mirror. You're only saying that because you picked it out, I replied with a playful roll of my eyes. And I did a damn good job, Ember huffed, adjusting the straps of her own dress. A wave of calm washed over me as Magnus emerged from the bathroom. His tousled chocolate hair was irresistible, and his black suit clung to his broad frame. My gaze was fixed on him, while his dark eyes roamed over my dress. A blush crept up my cheeks as Ember cleared her throat, her discomfort evident. If you don't mind, I'll be out in the hallway, Ember said, glancing between us. Don't take too long. Dad will be furious if you're late. As soon as Ember left, Magnus swept me into his arms. Despite his role as my bodyguard, he meant so much more to me. I hadn't pushed him to reveal details about his past, allowing him to share what he felt ready to. He'd mentioned his troubled childhood with Mason and their younger brother, and how he'd been exiled from the kingdom by Mason himself. I could sense he wasn't ready to divulge more, so I waited. Magnus had shown me a side of himself he kept hidden from others, the hardened killer with a soft spot for only me, his mate. Our lips met in a fervent kiss, savoring the softness of each other's mouths. Our tongues danced together as I struggled to keep my fingers out of Magnus's hair, ultimately failing. "Little princess," Magnus chuckled, his voice low and teasing. "We're going to miss your coronation," he added. "I'm sure they'll manage without me," I murmured against his lips. Magnus's eyes darkened, though his smirk remained. "I'm afraid I'll be blamed if you're late." I groaned against him in frustration, giving him a pout before he set me back on my feet. "You'll need to find a new nickname for me once this is over," I said, flashing him a grin while keeping my arms around his neck. "You'll always be my little princess," Magnus chuckled. "That won't change." The ballroom was packed, more crowded than it had been on my birthday. Guards stood by every window, overseeing the guests. Dad stood on a low platform, facing the sea of people. I could see the vein in his neck throbbing, his frustration and nerves palpable. Ember and Magnus had to leave my side, standing just below Dad. I scanned the crowd from the balcony, trying to steady my nerves. I descended the stairs, focusing on keeping my mind occupied as hundreds of curious eyes followed my every move. Magnus's gaze was the only thing that relaxed me as I made my way down. Taking my place on the platform next to Dad, I noticed the tension in his eyes, though he seemed somewhat relieved. While this coronation was a once-in-a-lifetime event for me, it was Mom who would have relished in the planning and execution. She loved orchestrating every detail and designing the ballroom for special occasions. Mom was supposed to plan my coronation, a moment she would never see. Dad began his speech, and my stomach twisted with each word. Everything was about to change. Kira and I would become major targets, ruling over an entire kingdom. Dad would always be there to help, but the responsibility and recognition would fall on me. Magnus's dark eyes anchored me, seeming to understand my inner turmoil. I wondered if Magnus had ever experienced his own coronation. I imagined him in my place, wearing a crown and being named king with Mason by his side. The thought left a sour taste in my mouth. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, pulling me from my thoughts. I reluctantly tore my gaze away from Magnus to face the people gathered for the event. Dylan Lancaster's red hair stood out as we made eye contact. A smile spread across his face, his father standing beside him. I wasn't surprised Daisy Lancaster was missing. Dylan had kept a tight rein on her after recent events. Dylan had stayed in touch, providing updates about his kingdom, and now he was finally on the throne, his father proudly by his side. As kind-hearted, brave, and strong as her mother, Dad continued, causing my heart to flutter with his praise. My daughter will usher in a new era as the first Alpha Queen. Dad motioned for me to step forward on the small platform. Unlike in movies, we didn't have a grand throne. Thrones were impractical and unnecessary. Dad was always too busy to sit idly. Dad lifted an intricately designed crown from a white pillow. The gold gleamed under the sunlight, casting yellow rays around the room. The crown, adorned with sparkling green gems, reminded me of the strange necklace I wore. It was mainly ceremonial, a symbol of my rule, used for formal events and royal visits. The necklace had remained cold for the entire month, never warming. I sometimes wondered if I had imagined the entire incident with Vesper. Uncle Orion wasn't a traitor, and Vesper wasn't dead. Magnus, standing nearby, reminded me that something good had come from this ordeal. As Dad placed the crown on my head, the room fell silent. I watched Dad's lips move as he spoke to the crowd, but I heard nothing. I was lost in my own thoughts. The crown felt cool and heavy on my head, symbolizing the weight of the responsibility now mine. Magnus's dark, knowing eyes met mine from the side. He stood silently, a faint smile on his lips. His ability to see through me was uncanny, whether it was the mate bond or something else. My hearing returned when Dad pulled me into a tight hug, his face beaming with pride. My stomach churned as it was my turn to address the crowd. I had rehearsed for this moment my entire life, but nothing could truly prepare me. I masked my nerves with a smile, ready to face the audience. Dad had gone over this part of the ceremony with me since I was 7. This was where I would choose my beta and a royal advisor. I couldn't help but remember how Uncle Orion served as Dad's royal advisor. Each new ruler could choose their own beta, so I could either keep Beta Jackson or appoint someone new. Fortunately, the decision was straightforward. I named Jackson Keloid as my beta. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice and keep it strong. Some of the men in the crowd looked slightly disappointed, but everyone clapped politely. Beta Jackson smiled, offered his thanks, and took his place beside me. Gradually, the knot in my stomach began to ease as I remembered the next part of the ceremony. I name Ember Sinclair as royal advisor, I declared, my voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd. I also name my dad as royal advisor. A knowing smile crossed my dad's face as our eyes met. Just like his father had helped him, my dad would assist me in ruling. Ember looked stunned. Her mouth fell open in surprise. I wanted to laugh at the determined expression that quickly replaced her shock. She stepped onto the small platform, standing close to Beta Jackson, her chin held high and a smug smile on her lips. Ember had been prepared for this role long before my coronation had been planned. She had supported me through everything, guiding me along the way. The ceremony seemed to stretch on forever, even though I only caught snippets of the words being spoken. Once it was over, the rest of the evening was less stressful. The coronation felt much like my birthday gala, minus the masked men trying to kill me. Guests mingled and danced, and the room was filled with an abundance of food and drinks. As at my birthday gala, all eyes were on me, though at least the men weren't trying to date me this time. My heart raced with each congratulation I received, a smile spreading across my face. I scanned the crowded ballroom, searching for a familiar set of dark eyes. Ember and I had lost track of Magnus after the ceremony, and I had been looking for him ever since. "You seemed to space out a few times during the ceremony," Ember said with a chuckle, taking a sip of her champagne and giving me an amused look. "I did space out," I admitted with a laugh. "It's all a bit overwhelming." "Tell me about it," Ember said with a grin. "And don't forget about my holiday bonus. I haven't forgotten." "How about a suite for you and your mom?" I suggested with a smirk. "And your own office, of course." Ember raised an eyebrow. "Does it come with a nice bathtub?" "The same as mine," I said, recalling how Ember had envied my bathtub on more than one occasion. "When will it be ready?" Ember's lips twitched into a smile. "It'll be ready tomorrow," I said, grinning. Dad had suggested the idea, and we'd remodeled the suite for Ember and Amara. "Thanks, Aura," Ember said, her golden eyes shining with gratitude. Across the room, I finally spotted Mad Magnus. A smile spread across my face as I locked eyes with him. Discomfort flickered in his eyes as two women approached him, speaking animatedly. Jealousy surged through me, but Magnus's gaze quickly quelled that emotion. With just a word to the women, he turned and walked towards me. "Little princess," Magnus murmured, a smirk playing on his lips as he read the heat in my eyes. "You're already popular," I teased, glancing at the two women who gaped at me in shock. Magnus wouldn't be crowned until we eventually married. We were taking our time, wanting to savor every moment of our relationship. Honestly, I wanted to get to know Magnus better before taking that step. "Jealousy suits you," Magnus said with a smirk, running his hand along my flushed cheek. "Come with me." Ember gave me an encouraging smile as Magnus took my hand. We made our way through the ballroom, passing by my dad. The stress from Uncle Orion's betrayal was still evident on his face, but his eyes looked less haunted than before. We were both slowly healing, though the scars would remain. Magnus led me to the back door and onto the patio. Some guests were strolling through the garden, which had been completely remodeled for my coronation with Ember's help. Strings of lights hung from the trees like bright fireflies, and intricate fountains trickled water from every corner. The flowers, illuminated by the lights, created a vibrant display of pink, purple, and yellow. Magnus guided me to the gazebo, a place filled with cherished memories, mostly involving Vesper, which brought a pang to my heart. "We'll make new memories," Magnus murmured as he helped me up the stairs of the gazebo. Strings of lights wrapped around the gazebo's poles, casting a warm glow on the white wood. White lilies adorned the railing, making the gazebo stand out like a beacon in the garden. I was almost speechless at the garden's beauty. It felt like a magical new world. I wished my mom could have seen it. She would have adored the dazzling colors and lights. "She might not be here, but she's watching," Kira whispered, a smile on her face. Magnus drew me closer, wrapping his arms around my waist as his dark eyes roamed over me. My hands found their way to his neck, playing with his dark hair. We swayed gently to the faint music drifting from the ballroom. Even though everything was calm for now, I sensed a storm brewing, just as Ember had. We both mourned our lost friend and the life she had lived. I grieved for my Uncle Orion and the pain of betrayal. Through it all, Magnus had been my rock. He had held me through sleepless nights, haunted by nightmares, supported me through tears and frustration. I knew that when the storm finally hit, Magnus would stand beside me, ready to face whatever came. Magnus was right. We would indeed create new memories. The end.